Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the B20 Italy Inception meeting, Reshape the Future, Include, Share, Act. This is the beginning of the Italian B20 presidency, the official beginning. My name is Giuseppe De Bellis. I'm the editor-in-chief of Sky TG24, the Sky Italia news channel, and today I will be serving as moderator and presenter of this event. I would like to start by thanking the leadership of B20, starting from the president of Confindustria, Mr. Carlo Bonomi, the B20 chair, Mrs. Emma Marcegaglia. Thanks, Mrs. Marcegaglia. I'd like also to thank the Italian Minister of Economy, Roberto Gualtieri, the B20 Sherpa, Marco Felisati, and the 8 B20 Task Force Chair. They will meet tomorrow. We are right now, as you can see, in a digital model. I'm with Mrs. Marcegaglia in Confindustria Auditorium in Rome. The other panelists and speakers will be connected with us on digital platforms. You can join us on website, B20 website and social media account, or you can follow us broadcasting either in Sky satellite platform on the channel 501 or Bloomberg platform. We will have a very exciting agenda split between 2 days. The day one, today, is a public session, and it is dedicated to understand, through the words of our guests, the context we live in and how we can act, include, and share for reshape our future. We will have many great speakers and panelists. You will discover them one by one. We are very honored to hear from their own voices their ideas on the world as is today and the world that could be tomorrow. During our session and our panel, you will see on your screen some graphic highlights. They are realized by Alex Hughes. Thanks, Alex, for joining us. It's a graphic facilitator who will help us to summarize the key points of every and each panel and speech. Tomorrow, in the day 2, will be a closed-door session only for B20 members, and it will be focused on the work of the 8 task forces of B20. The 8 B20 Task Force Chair will share with us their ideas and their strategy for the roadmap on 2021 for each of them task forces. Each of them is dedicated and focused on a specific topic. So we're ready to start, and please join us and help me to join and welcome our first speaker, the President of Confindustria, Mr. Carlo Bonomi.
Dear Emma, dear Minister Gualtieri, Secretary Kerry, President Sassoli, Commissioner Gentiloni, Vice President Cannapico, distinguished guests, speakers and discussants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to welcome you at the B20 Italy 2021, the official G20 engagement group reserved to business. The Italian G20 presidency has entrusted Confindustria with being the sole B20 host organization of the G20 Italy cycle. It is honor and privilege. We have accepted with spirit of service, conscious of the role of the G20 and of its utmost relevance, especially in the current conjuncture. Never in the recent history, the global community has faced a widespread, capillary, disruptive and persistent threat like the pandemic. In such a critical scenario, business is not only acting as a responsible and accountable stakeholder. While striving to remain on the marketplace, companies are called to boost economic growth, generate employment, spread innovation, promote sustainability, reduce inequalities. We are aware of our greater responsibility, and we are proud of it. But most of all, we are committed to provide a concrete contribution to overcome the crisis and to establish a new global paradigm. The G20 is the most prominent forum for international economic cooperation, where political leaders can share visions and set common objectives. But the current unprecedented circumstances urge them to go far beyond. One of these circumstances stands incomparable higher above all others, and it is the continued dramatic loss of human lives. We all remember 2010. Compared to last decade's crisis, the current one required the G20 to enact a systemic shift, a major change, as sharp and determined as is needed. The pandemic stands as a watershed. Its outbreak has revealed that the global governance is dangerously fragmented and intrinsically fragile. Whereas coordination, inclusion, and decision-making sharing are the only ways forward, we call on the G20 to become once again a board where leaders agree on urgent actions, endorse a level coordination guideline, make them enforced, monitor their compliance, and task relevant international institutions and organizations to adopt binding rules where necessary. Dear Minister Gualtieri, the Italian G20 cycle faced epochal challenges, but it is the capacity to be game-changer. Business is committed to making 2021 remembered for a worldwide social, economic, and environmental regeneration. We deserve it, all of us, individuals, societies, companies, socio-economic actors, in advanced, developing and least developed countries in all regions of the world. To succeed, the role of business is undoubtable. We offer the G20 presidency a truly cohesive and long-sighted public-private partnership. We are ready to deploy our best efforts and energy to achieve the target. Confindustria has tasked with the B20 its best officers that are engaged in the B20 preparation since mid-last year or even before, closely interacting with their government counterparts and with all relevant international networks. Outstanding CEOs have started working months ago. First, and above all, Emma, who I have asked to lead the process, and then I thank for her unconditional support. Thank you, Emma. We are committed because we believe that we can make the difference, and we will. Business sees solutions where others only see problems. We find consensus where others fight. We strike balances where others fail to compromise. The G20 is called to deliver, soundly, timely, and effectively. The time is now. Some encouraging signals start being visible. Not yet enough to see the light of the tunnel, but tangibly positive for the first time since February last year. Massive vaccine campaigns are ongoing in many countries. Our hope is that they will be run worldwide soon. Large-scale effect will take time, but the frantic search has finally concluded, and the long-awaited remedy is there. Huge stimulus packages are being deployed in the most world economies. We look for world market forces to remain the driver of the resource allocation, and that public funds are invested in a rewarding manner. Independently from the pandemic crisis, the geopolitical landscape has never been as complex for business as it has become in recent years. Market predictability was seriously hindered. Investment decisions were postponed or cancelled. Precious global value chains shrank or were destroyed. But major changes are likely to occur in the international chessboard. We are eager to see them taking place at the soonest. If G20 leaders will genuinely renew their commitment to the multilateral architecture, the market Paesi will permit appeasement. The economic recovery will take off more quickly, and the path to a long-term, fair, and sustainable growth will be clearer. Dear Minister, honorable guests, we are ready to support the G20 community in building a new era of growth and prosperity. Thank you for the attention, and I wish you a fruitful business 20.
Thanks, Mr. Bonomi. Thank you so much. Now, Mrs. Emma Marcegaglia, join the podium and for your remarks. Thank you for your welcome.
Dear Carlo, dear Minister Gualtieri, Secretary Kerry, President Sassoli, Commissioner Gentiloni, Vice President Scannapieco, Mr. Beasley, speakers and discussant, and dear colleague. It is with the utmost pleasure that I address this distinguished audience. I would like to thank all of our speakers and express my particular gratitude and a warm welcome to Secretary Kerry. Yesterday marked the beginning of the Biden administration, and this fills us really with hope. We believe that now that America is back, as President Biden has said, our work to provide concrete responses to the great global themes, such as the fight against climate change and the return of a truly efficient multilateralism, can be enhanced. But we also believe that the conditions now exist for the rebuilding of strong relations between Europe and the United States. This, in turn, will favor international relations, which will be of benefit of all. At the outset, let me express my thanks to Carlo Bonomi for having entrusted me with leading the B2021 Italy. I really feel deeply grateful for this and immensely honored. I will reward your trust, Carlo. Today marks the official start of our B20. Over 1,000 delegates from the G20 countries, including top executives from the leading multinational corporations, the B20 overall brings together 3,000 participants, representing a community of over 6.5 million businesses. This is the engine of the world economic development. We have witnessed an enormous interest for participation in our B20 because the Italian G20 and B20 will be of extraordinary importance. And we know why. 2021 must be and will be the year of the Renaissance. It must be remembered as the year when the virus was defeated and the year when the return to growth was made possible. As Carlo has said, we see the light at the end of the tunnel, but how we will emerge from the crisis and what awaits us is still not clear. But our idea of the future is. It is right there where you see our claim. So we say, reshape the future, include, share, and act. So we know that the world will never be the same again. We also know that serious problems were troubling the global area even before the pandemic, undermining our capacity to create jobs and growth. Think, for example, about the crisis in multilateralism, or again, conflicted international relationships all over the globe, or a rise in protectionism, or still growing inequalities with the nations, or profound divergences on how to pursue sound and long-term environmental sustainability. So problems were still there to be solved. But the first thing we want to say and to underline is that the greatest lesson learned from the pandemic is that global problems can only be faced together. There is no other way. The only other way is conflict, is war. So this is what we mean by share. We have to decide together and solve the problem together. Restoring a sound multilateralism is first and foremost a cultural mission. Closure and nationalism only make tension more acute, doesn't solve problems. But we need also multilateral organizations that are capable of dealing with a global paradigm that is radically different and incomparably more complex compared to the reality when they were conceived. The clearest example in this case is the World Trade Organization. We all know that it has been done to lower the duties, but now to need to deeply rethink the way it works, because we need that. So as I said, the first thing for us is to share, to work together. But this is not enough. We need also a model of growth based on free and fair markets and on the innovation of companies to boost employment. It's not the state that create employment, it's the innovation of the company. But we also need companies to take on a strong responsibility to reach a high level of social inclusion and environmental sustainability. The sense of responsibility must especially be channeled towards our youth and towards women. And so in this case, better education, digital skills, employability are key. This is what we mean by include. I want also to underline that competitiveness and inclusion go hand in hand. Neither can stand alone without the other, since reinforces industry competitiveness, multiplies its ability to encompass an inclusive and sustainable society, and thus strengthen long-term competitiveness. So we talk about share, we talk about include, now we want to talk about act. The Italian G20 and B20 will be anything but a formality. We are absolutely determined to have a real and lasting impact because we need it. And as business, since we are the one who create jobs, who knows the market, who boosts innovation and employment, we are convinced that we can strongly contribute to reshaping a better global paradigm. Our voice must be loud and clear. And through the G20 Italian presidency, we will convey policy recommendations and suggest concrete action that will need to be duly considered and hopefully adopted and enforced, timely and effectively. To ensure complete synergies with the G20, we will estimate their impact against the UN SDGs and the G20 claim, people, planet, prosperity. There are grounds for a truly fruitful B20 and G20 partnership. And as Carlo has stressed, the time is now. Our recommendation will come from the work of our 8 task forces and their 1,000 members that I want to thank. And also I wish also to thank the Italian chairs for the passionate commitment and all the Italian and international CEOs and the principal, the Business Federation, for their invaluable guidance. I want to conclude saying that even though the scenario is still uncertain, we have a positive vision and feel ready to face the challenges ahead of us. But we are also determined to take full advantages of the enormous opportunities that stand before us. Italy is a long-standing, reliable Atlantic partner. We feel enormous respect for all the countries. The kind of respect that is inherent in our culture. We are open, flexible, intrinsically innovative. We are the land of beauty, for sure, of cultural heritage, but we are also one of the world's stronger manufacturing industries projected towards the future. So I have no doubt that Italy will rise to the occasion and demonstrates its strong leadership. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thanks, Mrs. Marcegaglia. Now, probably we can see connected our next guest. So welcome to the Italian Minister of Economy, Roberto Gualtieri.
Thank you, dear friends. Thanks for inviting me to open this session of the Business 20. This is an an important opportunity to present the main priorities of the Italian presidency to some of our most distinguished stakeholders. Italy is taking up the G20 in an extremely challenging environment. We expect 2021 to be the year of mass vaccination and victory against the pandemic. The world economy has shown remarkable resilience in recent months, even as many countries were savaged by a second wave of the pandemic. World trade and manufacturing production have resumed expanding, and this is thanks not only to a more selective approach to lockdowns and social distancing rule, but also thanks to vigorous fiscal and monetary policy actions. However, the battle is far from over, and the global recovery is still weak and uneven. Most importantly, the legacy of the crisis will weigh on our societies for years to come. And against this backdrop, policies need to remain supportive until the recovery is firmly established. We believe that reversing fiscal accommodation at this stage of the pandemic would be a costly mistake. However, the focus should gradually shift from current expenditure and tax breaks to investment, both public and private, in order to regain output losses and promote growth. In this vein, the Italian presidency will encourage globally policymakers to continue their effort to overcome the pandemic and foster a sustainable, balanced, and inclusive recovery. At the same time, we are firmly convinced that the current juncture provides an opportunity to develop new paradigms to move towards a transformative growth and deliver a broad-based prosperity. As you probably already know, we have summarized this vision under three pillars: people, planet, and prosperity. To succeed, global economies should join forces. And this is why our presidency aims at revamping multilateralism as a key principle of international cooperation. We are confident, extremely confident, that the change in the US administration is opening new opportunities to relaunch transatlantic and international cooperation. America is back. And while remaining realistic and aware that the G20 is a consensus-based group, we can hopefully make progress on a number of sensitive yet crucial topics such as global health, climate action, and sustainable growth. I believe the G20 finance track can give an important boost to international cooperation on these topics. Let me then go through our main ideas, which can be summarized under 6 main priorities. First, in our interconnected planet, public health should be considered a global common good. Global health is a matter of relevance for all countries, no matter for their momentary success in the fight to the virus. We should continue our efforts until the pandemic is eradicated all over the world. Only then we will be able to return to normal lives, global growth, and stability. For this reason, the Italian presidency will promote adequate investment and universal access to health and vaccines. We will continue to cooperate closely with health ministers with a view to strengthening the resilience, inclusiveness, and response capacity of health systems. Going beyond the fight to this pandemic, we shall make sure that future generations are better prepared against similar shocks. Massive efforts are underway to develop and distribute vaccines and treatments and to strengthen surveillance networks and global protocols for health emergencies. However, resources remain limited, resulting in unacceptable human and economic costs. Looking forward, we intend to promote a review of the financing system for global commons and goods and how to better leverage resources from public, private, philanthropic, and international financial institutions towards pandemic prevention, surveillance, preparedness, and response. Our proposal is that the G20 mandated high-level independent panel to recommend actionable solutions building on WHO assessments of gaps in pandemic preparedness and ongoing international initiatives. The panel would present its recommendations to ministers and governors in July for their consideration and follow-up decision in conjunction with the health ministers in October. Our second priority is to promote an international environment conducive to investment and growth. The presidency will foster coordination building on the action plan and on a monitoring system which should factor in the risks stemming from different sources of instability, including climate and health conditions. Looking forward, we will put a strong focus on how investment in digitalization can contribute to productivity gains while making sure that nobody is left behind along the transition. Investment in quality infrastructure also play a critical role to spur economic recovery and to set the ground for a sustainable and inclusive growth. Investment in infrastructure should not be limited to new large-scale projects. Good practices at the local level should be encouraged. Similarly, maintaining and optimizing existing assets should be given high priority. Our third priority is to make sure the global financial system is effective in financing the real economy. The financial sector also play a key role in accompanying the green transformation. We will foster initiatives to improve the resilience of the financial system against climate-related stability risks, including by ensuring better quality data and more comparable disclosure. I know you will discuss this important issue with Michael Bloomberg later today. The COVID-19 also contributed to shed light on the opportunities and challenges linked to the spread of digitalized financial services. Under our presidency, we will try to address the gaps related to digital and financial awareness of vulnerable groups and firms. Our fourth priority is to support vulnerable economies and strengthen the international financial architecture. In 2020, the immediate liquidity needs for the most vulnerable countries were addressed. Our presidency will follow up on the existing initiatives while favoring a gradual shift to addressing longer-term financing needs and pursuing the Sustainable Development Goals. Fifth, a fairer and more sustainable international taxation system is key to promote global trust. Expectations are high on G20 members, and the Italian presidency is committed to meet these expectations. We will strive to reach a comprehensive agreement on the taxation of digital economy and on the definition of a global minimum effective taxation based on a work carried out by the OECD. Moreover, we cannot ignore the potential of taxation in supporting the green transition. Italy will foster a debate on the role of taxation in protecting the environment and promoting a more efficient use of energy. Finally, we must meet the challenge of improving living conditions for all while protecting our planet. Let me spend a few more words on this key priority. The current juncture represents a unique opportunity to shape the recovery and orient it towards a more sustainable and inclusive model. As a G20 presidency, we feel responsible to promote a multilateral approach to define strategies capable of creating quality jobs while promoting a fair transition towards modern, resource-efficient, and competitive economies in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the path set by Europe with its Green New Deal. An ambitious green agenda will be a cross-cutting priority across all the G20 activities, ranging from the inclusion of environmental risks in macroeconomic analysis to the impact of green investment on productivity to the potential of nature-based solutions applied to infrastructures. Our presidency also decided to re-establish the Sustainable Finance Study Group, whose activities were discontinued over the last 2 years. The group will explore ways to enhance the role of the financial system in promoting a just transition toward low carbon and greener economy, creating new opportunities and mobilizing resources toward a sustainable recovery. In particular, the group will propose solutions to improve quality, availability, and comparability of data to assess financial risks and opportunities stemming from climate change. We really hope the establishment of this group, and more generally our ambitious green agenda, can contribute to fuel a global debate on a number of sensitive yet crucial topics such as sustainable finance, energy poverty, environmental taxation, or carbon pricing. We also intend to provide a political forum for such a debate. On 11th of July, at the margins of the ministerial meeting in Venice, the presidency will host a high-level event with ministers, governors, and eminent representatives of the private sector and international organizations to publicly reflect on how to foster a green and inclusive transformation at a global level. Therefore, I take the chance to invite you to our discuss in Venice. I attach great value to the contribution of business to a sustainable recovery. Mobilizing private resources towards green investment is key to succeed in the green transition. Dear friends, thanks for your attention. As I said at the beginning, a renewed multilateralism is a precondition to make progress on our ambitious agenda. On a similar vein, we devote the utmost importance to fully involving the business community and the civil society at large. We will do so all over our presidency. We count on your support and on all the engagement, competence, and energy that you can mobilize. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister Gualtieri. So with this speech, we closed our opening session, and we are ready to move to the next one. So please. So we are ready for this session, keynote session, as you can see. And as I said before in my introduction, we have many great speakers. So I'm very happy and honored to introduce you our next speaker, Secretary John Kerry. Mr. Kerry?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Special Envoy, Presidential Special Envoy for Climate of US. Thank you so much for joining us.
Privileged to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, go.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be able to join all of you today. Very, very important gathering. Here in Washington, it is 7:30 in the morning on my first full day as Presidential Climate Envoy for President Biden. And I think it's appropriate that we're at the early hour from our point of view after the inauguration yesterday, because really time is of the essence. We really literally do not have minutes and hours to waste in this endeavor. And more than ever, I think it is clear the importance of the private sector cannot be overstated. In my judgment, I felt this way when I left being secretary. No government is going to succeed in individually solving this problem. It's going to take the private sector massively all across the planet to push the technology curve, to do what is necessary to create the products and use the marketplace effectively to be able to encourage the behavior that will be necessary to reach our goal. We began down that road in a serious way yesterday when President Biden signed the instrument to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. And he has put together a team, which I'm privileged to be part of, climate experts and leaders, all of whom I think share the same vision here, So with a few strokes of the pen, he reasserted our leadership. And let me just make it clear, we will move forward with a combination of humility and ambition. And I say humility because obviously we know with pain and some embarrassment that for the last 4 years, the leader of our country chose to pull out of the agreement and frankly engage in reckless behavior with respect to the future of people all over the world. But on the other hand, we come with great purpose for higher ambition because we have been involved in this for a long period of time. I personally was in Rio, 1992. I've been in Kyoto. I've been in countless COPs in various parts of the world and had the privilege of leading our negotiating team in Paris. And so even while we are still upset over what has happened over the last 4 years, we know that we just have to make up for it. And we have to get to work and get to work after 4 wasted years during which the United States should have been helping to meet this challenge. And we thank Europe and congratulate Europe for the many ways in which Europe stepped up and worked hard. I will mention one thing that many people aren't aware of. On the day that President Trump pulled out of the agreement, I joined with Governor Cuomo of New York, with Governor Inslee of Washington, with Governor Jerry Brown of California, and we announced jointly that there was a movement in our country called We're Still In. And we worked hard in the country to stay into the Paris Agreement. 38 states in the United States of America have passed renewable portfolio standards. And so they continued to work to meet the Paris Agreement. And more than 1,000 mayors, the mayors of every major city in America, remained in on the Paris Agreement. So while the president pulled out, I think it's safe to say that those 38 states represent 80% of the American people, and the American people remained always committed to this endeavor. We also have humility, and I think we all have to share this humility. Even though we have a huge industrial capacity and the largest economy in the world still, we are only 15% of the 100% of emissions. And it's clear, China being 30%, and you can run down the list, EU is about 15, 14%. So together, 3 entities are more than 60%, around 60% of the emissions of the world. And it is clear that at the COP, at the meeting that will take place in Glasgow, where we will assemble after the delay from the pandemic, we really have the world's last, most important opportunity to come together, to raise ambition, and to take the next step from Paris. Failure is simply not an option. Every single nation must work to raise ambition, even though we obviously know from many years of these negotiations that different nations have different capacity in what they are currently able to do. And particularly, we are sensitive to the fact that there are about 138 nations that represent each of them less than 1% of the emissions of the world, fractions of the percentage when you add up 138 countries. So success means tapping into the best of our collective ingenuity, creativity, diplomacy, all the way from brain power to energy power, to alternative energy particularly, using every tool that we have at our disposal to get where we have to go. We have to end the procrastination and even denial, particularly we've seen it in our country by some people, as to acknowledging where we need to go. The world has moved fairly rapidly to an assumption of responsibility for trying to achieve by 2050 a net zero emissions. And most businesses around the world now, increasingly in the boardrooms, are discussing ESG and SDG and are thinking very hard because boards of directors' attitudes have changed, because business leadership has changed. And there's a lot of movement, a lot of energy. And I think that we can tap into that in order to create, as previous speakers have mentioned, a more equitable recovery, but the recovery that we all need. So the road ahead, in my judgment, is actually exciting. It is not a choice, as some deniers and obstructionists have tried to say to people. It is not a choice between one's current quality of life or a better quality of life and a downward spiral. That is not true. That is a lie. In fact, up until COVID hitting the United States, the fastest growing job in America was solar power technician. The second fastest growing job was wind turbine technician. And the fact is that in this energy revolution, there are literally millions of jobs to be created for people all around the world. There is a healthier life to be lived by reducing the particulates in the air. We used to fight and hold people accountable for pollution. And that's what it is. It is pollution. Greenhouse gases are pollution. And there used to be a polluter pays principle that was well enforced. So we need to begin to recognize the benefits of what comes, not only better health and less disease, less cancer, but also greater security for nations around the world. And as we measure risk, and as risk is more measured in the context of business transactions and investment, and as more of the guardians of our financial systems begin to deal with disclosure and requirements for long-term measurement of risk, we are clearly going to be in a different position to be able to affect the allocation of capital. President Biden has made it clear that we have a mission to build back better. And building back better means not just making more money, but it means doing this in a way that addresses some of the societal concerns that many nations in the world have not adequately confronted. The example of what is happening should already be quite clear to people. The highest valued auto company in the world today is Tesla. It only makes electric vehicles. If that isn't a message, I don't know what is. Mitsubishi is building the world's largest zero-emission steel plant in Austria. Heidelberg Cement is working on a plant in Norway that anticipates capturing all its CO2 from concrete production by 2030. Globally, the cheapest new electric power plant that you can install is based on renewables, which explains why in the United States of America, a couple of years ago, 75% of all the new electricity that we were producing came from renewables. Green economies will generate new jobs. The transition to the new energy economy will create jobs. The EU anticipates some 2 million additional jobs with the green economy. And here in the US, until COVID, we had 5 years of steady growth in clean energy employment with over 3.3 million workers put into jobs across our country. India has seen a 5-fold increase in clean energy jobs over that same period. So I think the message from all of that is that we all need to move together in order to create the energy revolution necessary to deal with this crisis. The climate crisis is an energy crisis, how we provide our energy. And we all need to move together, set current goals, and recognize, I hate to say this, but recognize the truth. I mean, I don't hate to say the truth. I hate to say we have to come together now and really be willing to state it. And here is, in my view, the truth about where we are. When we left Paris, there was jubilation, obviously, when we passed the Paris Agreement, and rightfully so. There should have been. It was a major accomplishment to bring 196 countries together and have them all agree we're going to move in the same direction. That was the power of it. It wasn't that we guaranteed our citizens we were going to hold the Earth's temperature increase to 2 degrees centigrade. No, regrettably. That's not what we did. What we did was send a message, a giant message to the marketplace that 196 countries were going to move in the same direction at the same time. And that message was received because in the next 2 years, for each of them, after the Paris Agreement was agreed to, more money went into about $358 billion, more money went into alternative, renewable, sustainable energy development than into fossil fuel for the first time in human history. So that's the message. But the truth is, Paris was an agreement in which every country agreed to do what it could do, what it wanted to do. Every country wrote its own plan. That was the magic of the way everybody came together. But in doing so, we wound up with an equation where not every country wound up doing what it had to do, including us. There was a convenience factor. And now we are beyond any convenience, I'm afraid to say. We need to phase out coal 5 times faster than we have been, based on a comparison with the trend of 2013 to 2018. We need to increase tree cover 5 times faster than we are. We need to ramp up renewable energy 6 times faster. And the transition to electric vehicles needs to take place 22 times faster. Reaching net zero global carbon emissions as early as 2050 will take a wholesale transformation of the global economy. And it's not going to come about because someone in government dictates it and says, you got to do this. I mean, I know there are some regulatory regimes and other initiatives to try to change behavior, and it will change some behavior. But the real way to do this, the fastest way possible, is for those who invest and those who make the decisions about the allocation of capital and those who make the business decisions about what you'll buy and what your productive facilities will be and your methodologies and so forth. That has changed. That's where the decision making will occur. And those people who are great asset managers in the world and the financiers, the financial engineers of the world, need to begin to engineer and make decisions that are going to help us to achieve this massive transformation. And what is interesting is, folks, in most aspects of what we need to do, there are revenue streams. These are revenue producing transformations, whether it's a transportation project or an energy power production project, switching off of coal or gas into renewable or hydrogen or whatever it's going to be. Those all produce revenue streams. And therefore, they may not be a 20 or 50x or 100x of the founding of Google or Apple or something. But you know what? For a lot of people who are putting money into parked positions for the last 5-6 years where there was net negative interest being paid, ridiculous, it would be, I think, beneficial to be able to look to the prospect of 7 and 12 and whatever the percent is going to be. So we are looking at an unprecedented wealth creation opportunity. And I think that we have to recognize that since the Paris Agreement went into place, solar and wind power have doubled their share of global electricity already, going up to 10%, way too low still for where it needs to be. In most countries, renewable energy is now cheaper than fossil fuel power plants, and global investment in new clean power capacity is set to exceed $10 trillion through the mid-century, more than 6 times the investment in dirtier options. I'll be very blunt. I think we have to move from those dirtier options much faster. Some countries are funding coal-fired power plants around the world. Some countries are planning to bring increased coal fire online. So my plea to everybody is that we have to reach a much faster path of decarbonization. It is doable. It is a great challenge. And we need to bring our countries together to work together on the technologies that are available. We need to create consortia that work on the development of those technologies. I've talked to scientists recently who truly believe that there is a possibility of a new process in fusion that might, in fact, finally make the dream of fusion a reality. There are those still pursuing fourth generation modular nuclear because that is zero emission, and who knows if some of these other things are going to come through in time. There are all kinds of possibilities with respect to hydrogen. people who are now talking about moving whole economies to hydrogen. And obviously the challenge is to do so in a way that is not more energy intensive. So I think we're looking at one of the great moments of discovery on the planet, one of the great moments of opportunity for all of our economies. The bottom line is we have to do this. We have to do this. The damages that we're seeing from increased storms, the increased moisture from a warming ocean, the change in the movement of currents in the ocean, which we don't completely understand, but we know is happening. The change in we've seen with our fires in California, in Australia, and other parts of the world, the melting of glaciers, which promises to create greater challenges for provision of water to huge populations down the road. These are fundamental, basic challenges to the capacity of humanity to preserve the planet. We keep hearing the word existential. We're not behaving like it's existential. So we need to change. We have an opportunity in Glasgow, and we have an opportunity with the presidencies of Italy and UK. And the United States of America intends to work as diligently as we know how to bring people to the table to find the solutions, not to presume we can compel them, but to believe that there is an attraction here that should bring every business in the world to this table. It's the largest market the world has ever known. And we ought to learn and quickly how to take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Kerry. Thank you so much. And Secretary Kerry mentioned many times his country, United States, but he mentioned so many times also Europe. And our next speaker is one of the most important institutions. He represents one of the most important institutions in Europe. So welcome, David Sassoli, President of European Parliament. Welcome.
Grazie. Grazie, buongiorno alla Presidente Marcegaglia, saluto tutti gli ospiti. Sono contento di intervenire dopo John Kerry. Ci incontrammo nel gennaio dello scorso anno a Davos, quando con la Presidente von der Leyen andammo a presentare il Green Deal europeo. Fu una fortuna aver lavorato sul Green Deal, perché nel momento in cui abbiamo, dopo pochi mesi, cominciato a soffrire per il Covid-19, abbiamo subito capito che quella era la grande opportunità per l'Europa per concentrare tutti gli sforzi economici, finanziari, per quanto riguarda la ripresa del nostro continente. È stata una fortuna, nella sfortuna di vivere un tempo così difficile, aver colto l'opportunità di mettere a fuoco la possibilità di far concentrare a 27 Paesi dell'Unione Europea i medesimi sforzi, per ottenere i medesimi obiettivi, quelli che ci porteranno nel 2050 ad essere i primi della classe, il primo continente a emissione zero. Naturalmente abbiamo bisogno di lavorare intorno a delle modalità nuove. Non eravamo abituati e oggi dobbiamo allenarci a fare in modo che l'obiettivo di salvare il pianeta sia conciliabile con la sostenibilità, con il concetto di sostenibilità economica, sociale, perché nessuno resti indietro, perché nei paesi che partono svantaggiati e i cittadini non subiscono gli effetti ancora più forti di una disuguaglianza, e quindi abbiamo bisogno di usare questo periodo. Noi ci siamo dati due obiettivi, il 2030 e il 2050, come obiettivi, come termini per verificare l'andamento delle nostre politiche. Siamo entrati un anno fa nella più grave crisi dal secondo dopoguerra e l'Unione Europea ha cercato, dopo un primo momento di sbandamento, di concentrare i suoi sforzi, abbandonando molti modelli del passato. Nell'Unione si è sempre parlato tanto, dell'importanza dei vincoli e delle compatibilità, ad esempio economiche, quei modelli sono saltati, sono stati sospesi, se non addirittura messi in discussione, e questo ha portato a un nuovo concetto di solidarietà. L'idea che tutti e 27 Paesi stanno spendendo tanti soldi per lo stesso motivo. Ci porta a una conclusione, che abbiamo bisogno di politiche comuni. Naturalmente tenendo conto che chi parte da posizioni migliori farà debito, chi parte da posizioni svantaggiate farà ancora più debito, e naturalmente tutto questo non può pesare sulle generazioni future. Gli interventi che l'Unione ha messo in campo in questi mesi sono state delle vere e proprie invenzioni. Come finanziare politiche europee facendo debito comune, emettendo bond, andando sui mercati finanziari, trovando il modo per condividere sforzi enormi intorno a piani nazionali di ripresa, fare in modo che il bilancio dell'Unione Europea per i prossimi 7 anni fosse compatibile con l'esigenza di rafforzare il nostro modello sociale. Noi abbiamo una carta d'identità e ci teniamo molto come europei, è il nostro modello sociale. Abbiamo visto rispetto a tanti tentativi del passato quanto sia importante la sanità pubblica, e quanto in questo momento l'Europa possa considerarsi un po' diversa anche dagli altri. Nei nostri ospedali sono potuti entrare tutti, al di fuori della quantità di denaro che possedeva la propria carta di credito. Il nostro modello sociale è un po' il nostro biglietto da visita, e in questo momento ci troviamo in una situazione di grande difficoltà, perché abbiamo visto che la pandemia continua, che la crisi sta entrando sempre più in profondità, e abbiamo bisogno naturalmente di continuare con politiche comuni, ma di avere anche altre invenzioni, perché come ogni crisi si porta dietro il modello che noi sapremo costruire, non il modello che sapremo ereditare. E Parlamento europeo, Commissione, Consiglio hanno dal luglio scorso iniziato a imboccare una strada di forte solidarietà. Abbiamo iniziato questo anno, permettetemelo, l'avremo vissuto tutti nello stesso modo, con lo sguardo rivolto a Washington, e finalmente ieri questo periodo così opaco della vita degli Stati Uniti è terminato, e c'è un presidente, e uno dei suoi primi atti è stato quello di rientrare negli accordi di Parigi. Siamo molto soddisfatti, così come siamo molto soddisfatti che gli Stati Uniti rientreranno nell'Organizzazione Mondiale della Sanità. Abbiamo bisogno di forte collaborazione. Per la prima volta dal secondo dopoguerra l'Europa ha affrontato una crisi globale da sola. Non lo abbiamo potuto fare con il nostro partner naturale, gli Stati Uniti, impegnato forse a dividere l'Europa più che a lavorare con essa. E in questo momento, da ieri, siamo molto fiduciosi che le nostre relazioni riprenderanno. Avremmo potuto fare di più, con una forte collaborazione fra Europa e Stati Uniti, fare di più per i nostri cittadini, per le nostre imprese. Ecco perché questa fiducia si accompagna a una stagione che noi vogliamo sia nuova nelle relazioni transatlantiche e in uno spirito multilaterale che deve accompagnare questa emergenza. Abbiamo bisogno di un rapporto sempre più di amicizia stretto e di forte collaborazione. Abbiamo molte sfide da compiere. Una fra tutte è quella di come il mondo e l'Occidente, i paesi ricchi, l'Europa, gli Stati Uniti e non solo, si confronteranno con il resto del mondo e con soprattutto i paesi che avranno bisogno di noi. Credo che la grande questione, la grande opera di vaccinazione debba accompagnare queste nuove relazioni fra il nord e il sud del mondo, fra il mondo ricco e i paesi in via di sviluppo. La loro sicurezza è anche la nostra sicurezza e questo credo che debba essere accompagnato da politiche molto determinate, non solo a contrastare la pandemia, ma a consentire a tutti di uscire da questa crisi e di uscirne nel modo migliore. Abbiamo in questo momento un'economia europea che si è contratta a un ritmo paragonabile a quello della Seconda Guerra Mondiale, un drammatico aumento del numero di persone senza lavoro, la chiusura delle scuole, di tante imprese, di tante attività commerciali. La pandemia ha colpito i più vulnerabili, gli anziani, gli isolati, le donne, i giovani, i disabili. Non è vero che ha colpito tutti nella stessa maniera. Ha colpito soprattutto, ha consentito un aumento delle disuguaglianze che dobbiamo affrontare subito se non vogliamo che dopo la crisi le disuguaglianze aumentino ancora di più. I livelli sono molto preoccupanti e oltre a questo, a tutto questo, si è registrato un profondo aumento delle disuguaglianze fra gli Stati membri dell'Unione Europea, che hanno rivelato l'orizzonte di una forma di disunione tra i paesi con realtà economiche molto diverse. L'Europa ha cercato di rispondere a questo con la forza di un'emergenza economica e sociale, con sussidi pubblici distribuiti a livello nazionale, ovunque, in una forma mai conosciuta prima. Il pagamento delle imposte è stato sospeso o differito, il settore bancario è stato mobilitato, ad esempio per continuare a fornire credito alle imprese, alle famiglie. Questo aiuto urgente ci dimostra che siamo in una fase di emergenza sociale. Non esiste solo l'emergenza ambientale, di cui conosciamo la gravità, oggi siamo in un'emergenza sociale. Il debito associato al finanziamento di queste misure imposto dall'emergenza, che è stato sottoscritto dagli Stati membri, rimarrà ad alti livelli in modo duraturo e dovrebbe inevitabilmente portarci a riflettere sul futuro delle nostre regole di bilancio. Ecco perché credo che questo anno sia molto importante per cercare di dare riforme agli strumenti che noi abbiamo a disposizione, riforme europee. Oltre a questo abbiamo visto che se l'Europa si concentra su politiche comuni, se si abbassa e si equilibra il tono delle risposte, l'Europa può essere un attore in grado di dare il suo contributo, non lo può fare certamente da soli. Tuttavia abbiamo di fronte a drammatici eventi che ci stanno colpendo, dobbiamo ritrovare il senso di una forte solidarietà. Dobbiamo fare in modo che questa solidarietà sia politicamente utile ad uscire dall'emergenza. Spetta a noi certamente rispondere ai cambiamenti che la pandemia ci pone davanti e saranno di media e di lunga durata. Credo che l'Europa debba essere guidata dalla preoccupazione di non abbandonare i suoi obiettivi sul Green Deal. Il Parlamento europeo è molto impegnato su questo e valuterà naturalmente tutti gli interventi rispetto alle finalità che il Green Deal ci ha messo in evidenza. Abbiamo anche su questo un approccio davvero europeo e vogliamo averlo. La disuguaglianza è problema ambientale e così come il degrado ambientale è un problema sociale. È essenziale per noi comprendere che il progresso ecologico e il progresso sociale devono andare di pari passo. Ed è a livello europeo che occorre intervenire per mettere in comune una quota significativa di risorse fiscali, mettendole al servizio della transizione infrastrutturale ed energetica al fine di finanziare il bene comune europeo. Credo fermamente che il multilateralismo, come dicevo prima, e gli sforzi coordinati siano gli strumenti giusti per affrontare la crisi attuale. Negli ultimi mesi abbiamo assistito a sforzi senza precedenti per trovare un vaccino per il Covid-19. A dicembre abbiamo festeggiato i 5 anni dall'accordo di Parigi, eppure l'emergenza climatica e ambientale rimane molto pressante. 5 anni fa l'Unione Europea era in prima linea nella lotta al cambiamento climatico e oggi continua ad esserlo. Siamo soddisfatti che l'Unione abbia aggiornato i suoi impegni e che, come dicevo all'inizio, in realtà il Green Deal ci abbia consentito di affrontare questa sfida così difficile con una chiara lettura della contemporaneità. Dobbiamo mobilitare e sostenere l'industria. L'industria nel lavorare per un'economia più sostenibile, in modo che la competitività industriale e la politica climatica si rafforzino a vicenda. Proteggere l'ambiente significa, come è stato detto molto bene da John Kerry, nuovi posti di lavoro, più ricerca, più protezione sociale e naturalmente più opportunità. Sono convinto che il Green Deal sia la strada giusta per un futuro sostenibile, per lavorare con partner internazionali, se vogliamo uscire tutti più forti e migliori dalla crisi che abbiamo davanti. Accolgo con favore naturalmente i messaggi che arrivano dalla nuova amministrazione americana. Nel suo discorso Joe Biden ha parlato di alleanza da ricostruire rimettendo al centro la democrazia e il rispetto dei diritti. Anche noi lo abbiamo detto 1 anno fa, quando scoppiava il Covid. Questa crisi vogliamo affrontarla con la democrazia, perché abbiamo visto in giro per il mondo molti modelli che hanno fatto credere che con l'autoritarismo le crisi si affrontino meglio. No, è con la democrazia che si affrontano meglio le crisi e con la democrazia possono essere date le risposte alle domande dei nostri cittadini. Gli ultimi 5 anni hanno visto enormi cambiamenti. Sempre più paesi annunciano obiettivi ambiziosi, non solo all'interno dell'Unione Europea, ma abbiamo visto le scelte che sono state fatte dal Giappone, dal Canada e adesso dalla nuova amministrazione americana. Molti hanno annunciato che nel 2050, come noi, diventeranno neutrali dal punto di vista climatico. Beh, è il momento di mettere insieme i nostri sforzi. Anche la Cina è impegnata a diventare neutrale dal carbone entro il 2060, anche questa è una scelta che va sottolineata, è molto positiva. Questi impegni devono essere seguiti da passi concreti, che forniscano la certezza del diritto di cui le imprese hanno bisogno per fare gli investimenti necessari per la transizione. Aumentare le nostre ambizioni in un momento di crisi significa proiettarci nel futuro e non dover subire la dittatura della crisi, essere soltanto a rimorchio degli effetti che la crisi produce. Con la piena attuazione del Green Deal e dei piani di ripresa e con l'integrazione del cambiamento climatico e della biodiversità nel suo bilancio a lungo termine, l'Unione Europea può mostrare come muoversi verso la neutralità climatica e la resilienza climatica, garantendo al contempo prosperità e una giusta transizione. Le decisioni prese ora su come verranno stanziati i fondi per la ripresa daranno forma alla direzione di marcia per gli anni a venire. La lotta contro il cambiamento climatico comporta due sfide significative, ma anche una grande opportunità. Il Green Deal e il processo di recupero rappresentano un'opportunità per ridurre divari sociali, ridurre disuguaglianze nelle nostre società, assicurare una transizione che funzioni per noi e per le generazioni future. Vi ringrazio.
Thanks, President Sassoli. So with his speech, we can stop. We can end the keynote session and we can jump in the next one. From Europe to Europe, we can say, because the next speaker is another European institution. So welcome to Commissioner for Economy of European Commission, Paolo Gentiloni. Mr. Gentiloni, please.
Yes, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Buongiorno alla Presidente Marcegaglia e a tutti I presenti. Well, around the world, the new year started much in the same way as it ended, with daily updates of pandemic figures, with containment measures, and with online conferences, by the way. But there is, however, one major difference. With the rollout of vaccines, we are starting to see the famous light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, we don't know how long the tunnel will be. And so uncertainty is still there. But it will come to an end. And so now it's the time to have all hands on board to give the recovery the momentum it needs. This means using all the tools we have on the monetary, fiscal, and structural side, as well as ensuring a global coordinated response. Monetary policy has played a key role in protecting the economy from the risk of financial meltdown. Central banks around the world adopted accommodative stances that prevented the economic shock from spilling over in the financial system. In Europe, the ECB timely pandemic purchase program stabilized the markets, while incentives to encourage bank lending avoided the risk of a credit crunch. I believe we can expect that this kind of supportive monetary stance will continue until we are out of the woods. Fiscal policy has played and will continue to play an equally important role. Governments have adopted trillions worth of measures to protect people's jobs and help companies stay afloat. These have ranged from additional government spending, for example, to support the health sectors, SMEs, and employment insurance schemes, to tax deferrals, liquidity provisions, and guarantees. In Europe, critics used to point out, not unfairly, that monetary policy was the only game in town. It is no longer the case. The European Commission was quick to suspend state aid rules and fiscal rules giving national governments the budgetary space to prop up economy. On top of that, as you know, the EU took a historic decision to issue for the first time common debt for a common purpose, counter the shock and build back better. The 750 billion Next Generation EU marks a watershed in European integration and ensures that monetary and fiscal policy can support each other. Going forward, I believe fiscal policy should continue to strengthen the recovery. At the Commission, we have already made clear that our fiscal rules will remain suspended throughout 2021 and for as long as necessary. Looking across the Atlantic, the stimulus package announced by the new US administration goes exactly in the same direction. In the aftermath of the pandemic, we will need to reflect on the legacy of high public debt and return to pursuing more prudent fiscal policies. But we are not there yet. Not while our economies are still operating well below their full capacity, and not while every day in the EU we lose around 2,000 of our citizens to the coronavirus. Fiscal and monetary policy can provide much needed breathing space, particularly in the short term. But our aim cannot be to simply have a plus sign in front of our GDP figures. We would fall in our responsibility if we did not take this opportunity to address the defining challenges of our time and put our economies onto a sustainable growth path, one that works for the environment and for the people, as John Kerry and Davide Sassoli just said. This is actually at the heart of Next Generation EU, which is much more than a fiscal stimulus to jumpstart economic activity, much more. As the name implies, it is a plan to lift Europe's long-term growth potential through a combination of investments and reforms. By setting ambitious climate targets, we can support green solutions and create high-quality jobs. By embracing technological innovation, we can boost productivity, that elusive elixir of economic growth. By tackling head on any rises in inequality, we can ensure the recovery benefits everyone and not just a privileged few. The G20 is a unique forum, and under the Italian presidency, it has a crucial role to play in rebuilding the global economy, achieving climate neutrality, and establishing global rules for trade, technology, and taxation. Yesterday's inauguration of a new US administration will usher in a renewed commitment to multilateralism and to fight the climate change, as you just heard. It will find the EU a reliable partner. Ladies and gentlemen, businesses are key to finding these global solutions and leading the way for the recovery. Throughout the pandemic, businesses have shown incredible resilience in the face of unique circumstances. This crisis has forced businesses to adopt new processes and technologies, such as automation, e-commerce, and digital payments. There are reasons to believe that these innovations will give way to an era of rapid productivity growth and instill new dynamism in our economies. We should be aware of this and optimistic on the chance that we have in the future. The success of our recovery depends on businesses' ability to thrive. We will therefore be looking forward to the B20's recommendations in the months ahead. A year ago, right around this time, WHO declared that the COVID-19 outbreak was a public health emergency. The fact that in the space of 12 months, we are rolling out vaccines is a testament to our ability to come together in adversity. May we continue to work together in that same spirit to drive the recovery and pave the way for long-term prosperity. Thank you. Grazie.
Thanks, Commissioner Gentiloni. Thank you so much. And we can open right now another session, so please go. It is my pleasure to introduce you Dario Scannapieco, Vice President of European Investment Bank. Mr. Scannapieco, please. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Dear all, dear Emma, thank you for inviting me to the opening session of the B20 Italy 2021. It is really an honor to participate in this forum hosted for the first time by the Italian business community in such a symbolic and important year, 2021. The hope of the entire world rests on this year to recover hope and trust in the future. Why so? Indeed, because it follows year 2020, the year like no other, as the IMF has renamed it. Last year, the pandemic hit the world with its devastating death tolls, health implications, and economic crisis. Unfortunately, COVID-19 came along with a series of additional global emergencies. The United Nations Development Programme estimates that economic consequences of the global health crisis will bring 44 to 250 million people back into extreme poverty in the next 10 years. Should this prove to be true, it will wipe out the results of the constant effort to lift the entire world population out of the worst living condition, which means essentially those who are living with less than $1.9 per day, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. This contrasts sharply with the impressive increasing wealth of the 10 richest individuals in the world, who increased their personal fortunes by more than $400 billion in 1 year, and contributed to the rising wealth of the almost 2,200 global billionaires, whose aggregate assets amount now to some $10 trillion. So 2020 was indeed the apex of inequalities, and we are all aware of the risks that extreme inequality may imply. And this was a point that was highlighted rightly, in my view, from Chairman Sassoli. So at the same time, the maneuver space for governments is narrowing down. In fact, the entire world has fallen into an abyss of debt, which creates a huge burden on the shoulders of the younger generations. In G20 countries, the government debt on GDP ratio increased by 1/5 on average, moving from 60% in 2019 to 72.5% in 2020. Clearly, not every country has the same fiscal capacity to tolerate such a sudden increase. But as I was mentioning earlier, the pandemic aggravated several other crises. Younger generations all over the world are suffering on a daily basis from the disruption of the educational systems, with severe effects on learning and social interactions. According to UNESCO, at the apex of the lockdown, almost 1.5 billion students worldwide were forced to remain home, and still nowadays, 260 million pupils, which is more or less 15% of the world's student population, cannot attend classes from school premises. And this may lead to problematic situations. Moreover, should the lockdown measures continue for several months, soon we will reap the fruits of the psychological traumas suffered from our kids. Before the pandemic, the social condition of the world was not healthy under all the indicators, but certainly for most we were on a global positive trend, which started right after the global financial crisis. Economists, political scientists, and citizens all over the world are calling on their leaders, but also on the business community, on you, not to go back to 2019 and to the world that you knew before. The solution doesn't rest in the past, but lies in our future. It was highlighted both by Mr. Gentiloni and by Mr. Sassoli that Europe has responded to the crisis with a set of unprecedented measures, both in terms of scale and, I believe most importantly, nature. For the first time in its history, European states agreed on a massive joint and European response made of innovative instruments such as the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the SURE program, the ESM Pandemic Crisis Support, and also the EIB Pan-European Guarantee Fund. The above schemes amount to an aggregate of almost 2.4 trillion euro and are based on resource sharing and delegation from member states to European institutions. Of course, the EU was not the sole region in the world to respond massively. According to the latest economic research, the policy response in all advanced economies was timely and adequate to address the immediate needs of the business community. Yet, now it is time for a paradigm shift. Massive injection of cash, moratoria, and job protection instruments have helped businesses to survive the first lockdowns. Rolling over these type of measures may now pose a risk, especially if combined with a zero interest rate environment. As soon as the pandemic will be over, and at a certain point it will be over, we will face two major challenges. First, an increasing number of what are called zombie companies, artificially kept alive by subsidies, ease of credit extension, and obstacle to bankruptcy. Second, the so-called new normal, meaning a different business environment characterized by new way of living, working, and consuming. The easiest to think of are linked to technology, of course, smart working and no schooling, for example, but also, and many of you have experienced it, shortened supply chains. And when the pandemic will be over, a new demographic generation grown and shaped by lockdowns will approach the world, the so-called Generation Zeta, which will replace millennials in defining future social, economic, and political trends. So, as you can see, the post-pandemic world will be different, and governments and business have to be ready right now. So what can be done? Both the business community and policymakers have to leapfrog to the most advanced level of innovation and regulation, skipping an incremental approach. This continuity will be important in the action of many governments. A key concept should be, for example, twin transition, green and digital. And this also was mentioned by many of the speakers before me. Let's start with the green transition. The OECD calculated that it would take $6.9 trillion of infrastructure investment every year for 15 years to reach a 66% probability to maintain global warming below 2 Celsius degrees. An incredible amount of money that nevertheless would pay back. G20 countries alone would benefit from a growth effect of 4.63% on their GDP by 2050 if these investments were made. And this again, without considering the avoided costs of higher temperature increases. Moving to the digital transition, we experienced how relevant digital technologies were during the pandemic. Think about telemedicine, homeschooling, and video calls. However, digitalization is not relevant only in time of COVID, and firms that adopt digital technologies tend to invest more, innovate more, and grow faster. And these are the considerations which are derived from empirical data. Future economic prospects depend on digital technologies, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, quantum computing, virtual and augmented reality, blockchain, and integration of biology and engineering. In Europe only, completing the digital transformation and ensuring very high-speed connection for all would require almost 900 billion euro by 2025. Yet, the impact of disruptive technology will be roughly double than that of other general-purpose technologies adopted by developed countries in the past. So the EU is doing its part. The European Green Deal and the climate ambition of the EIB aim to mobilize up to 2 trillion euro of investment to fight climate change by 2030. And digitalization remain at the center of the EU agenda for the next decade. So resources, as you can see, are not scarce anymore. It was mentioned the incredible work done by central bank, but this time also fiscal policy has become very important. Public institution needs to rapidly design plans to use these resources to keep their territories prosperous and attractive. I think about modern regulation, material and immaterial infrastructures, an educated workforce, and climate resilient communities. As per the business world, it must use available resources to innovate, making investment in the most advanced technologies, reducing and offsetting its carbon footprint, and adapting to future trends. Institutions are already cooperating along these lines in Europe. And the idea to use is to use the public resources in a way which is smart, which means essentially to catalyze and attract other financiers and to activate investor multipliers. I mean, this is the experience we just completed with the Juncker plan, which was a very innovative and smart way to utilize public resources. And this is what many European countries are doing. And some of the most successful products we deploy at the European Investment Bank, the EU Bank, are in fact financial instruments that help promoters and financiers to transfer risks on the public budgets thanks to the introduction of first losses and public guarantees, and therefore they activate an investor multipliers. So public resources are there, but if utilized in a smart move, they can act important multipliers. Finally, this crisis taught us another important lesson. Only cohesive societies are resilient against extreme and unexpected shocks and survive the medium to long-term impact of a pandemic to the social fabric. Studies on previous pandemics conducted by the IMF researchers confirmed that social unrest increased about 14 months after pandemics and tend to peak after 2 years. In fact, and this is a point that also Emma was mentioning at the beginning, low economic growth combined with deterioration of income distribution and education indicators push societies into civil disorder, which in turn fuels a vicious circle of further economic depression and inequality. Now that we see, as all of us have said, the light at the end of the tunnel thanks to the vaccines, government now should turn to policies to alleviate the burden on the most vulnerable sectors of our societies, strengthening the welfare system and leaving no one behind. This, again, reminds us of policy-driven institutions in steering societies for the benefit of each of their members, and of the key role played by the so-called patient investors, financial institutions that do not need to maximize short-term profits, but invest resources to achieve longer-term collective results. Therefore, after a few years of suspicions, tensions, and economic wars, I call on the world to rediscover the added value of multilateralism, international cooperation, and especially solidarity. The modern English word solidarity comes from the old ancient Latin word solidus. And solidus means strong in Latin. And it tells us that only a cohesive society that takes care of all of its components and in which no one is left behind is a strong and resistant society. This applies to national communities, but also to the international one, where countries should cooperate for the common good and assist each other in moment of crisis. So let's put solidarity at the center of our agenda for the future while we rebuild a competitive and greener business environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scarnapiego. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. And we end our first session of this big session about single speeches, and we are ready to jump in a new session that will be a panel session. Go. We heard many things about political and financial point of view coming from Europe and from Europe institution. Probably it's the moment to understand which is the point of view of business community. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome and to introduce to you the next moderator of the new panel, which is a very brilliant and award-winner journalist, Francine Lacqua. Hi, Francine.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Larry Fink of BlackRock, and we have a little over 10 minutes to discuss the next 12 months. Larry Fink, apart from the vaccine rollout, first of all, thank you so much for joining us, but apart from the vaccine rollout, what is your biggest concern for 2021?
Well, hi, Francine, and hi, everyone. The biggest issue will be the vaccine rollout and the speed in which we can develop herd immunity in every society where we're operating. Obviously, the success of capitalism and the rollout of a vaccination in 10 months is really an extraordinary blessing that humanity has created. And that in itself is something to just pause and reflect on. But now we have billions of people who need to be vaccinated to get herd immunity. And until we have that herd immunity, in my mind, we're not going to have what I would say the economy to be more balanced. Right now, we are witnessing parts of the economy is doing really well because behavior changes during a pandemic and how we work and live. But we just cannot really build up the remainder of the economies that have been left behind because of the pandemic. And those components of the economy, I call it the aggregation part of our economy, is where people come together, whether it's cultural or social or travel or sports. We could go on, and we all know what that component is. Until we have safety, until we feel confident that we don't have to think about the realities of health, we're not going to have that balanced economy. And in my commentary to every business leader and every government today, the key for 2021 is not to continue the economies that we've had in 2020, which were robust in some and flatlined for others. Right. We need to find a way to make the economies more balanced. And I think the word for 2021 is an economy that's more broad. And until we have the broadening of the economy, like all recessions create inequalities. This specific recession is deeper, broader, and had much greater impact on some components of society, and other components of society did very well. So it's a very unique and different one.
But so how do you rebuild better? How do you change? Do you change the economy? Do you change capitalism? Do you change something else?
So as I said, I am so optimistic on capitalism. I really believe what businesses have done in 2020, whether it's the rolling out of food, making sure food in markets, we were successful in doing whatever we needed to do to allow most of society to operate. The success of society of functioning through remote videos like this one at the moment, we have been major components of society have been able to resume business in a very large way. But what every political leader and every business needs to think about, how do we then post-pandemic or post-vaccination where we have herd immunity, how do we successfully broaden the economy that more individuals participate? In most societies, we still have large segments of unemployment. We have other segments that are job seeking, companies are seeking to add jobs. BlackRock had an extraordinary year in 2020. We actually hired close to 3% even last year. And so we are growing like other companies, but some companies obviously had serious issues. And so we need to think about 2021 is a way to broaden the economy, to have greater participation. And the last thing I would say, and the financial markets are starting to show that, we need to make sure that the emerging world participates in the vaccinations and move on. As the emerging world can continue to grow because of the macro trends of deglobalizations impacting parts of the emerging world. Climate change is having a severe impact in parts of the emerging world around the equatorial part of the world. So these macro trends are confronting the world at the same time the pandemic confronted it. And so never in our lifetimes have we seen more unevenness in the world economies and in the really the makeup of the US economy and the European economy, where some segments doing well and others doing poorly.
Okay, if we change the economy, first of all, how does the economy change because of the pandemic? So what's the legacy? Are we going to go back to traveling the same way? Are we going to go back to in-person meetings like we used to?
Well, I was traveling 2 weeks a month. I hope I only have to travel 1 week a month. I do believe there's some major blessings from the pandemic. The blessings are we have learned to adopt and do our business remotely through video. I think the superficial meetings of flying 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours for a 2-hour meeting does not make sense anymore. And so we are going to adapt and change. I think how we consume, how we live is going to be partially changed forever. I think we're going to be more dependent on more virtual components of our lifetime. I do believe it, when we go back to school, I believe the top educational enterprises are going to do much more things virtually, remotely too, as an additive component to in-person. I think we are going to consume quite a bit of our consumption virtually. That is not going to change. I think we are going to travel, but we're not going to travel, until we feel 100% secure and safe. When you travel, when you put your clothes in a suitcase, when you get on an airplane, health is never an issue. When you go to another country or another city, health should never be an issue. Until that issue is behind us, we're going to do less of it. But that doesn't mean that we don't find ways of rebuilding. So I think the pandemic has created really great changes in how we live and how we operate and how we work. I don't believe, as I said publicly, I don't believe BlackRock will have 100% of workforce in office ever again. I believe it'll be a blessing if we could rotate 30% of our workforce all the time and working remotely. I mean, one of the big reasons why we see, let's say, a rising stock market is, the average person is not commuting to work anymore. They're saving whatever, $300, $400, $600 a month. They don't play, and so there's savings. We've seen huge savings rates increase in the developed world. And so there are many things that we're not talking about, some of the positives, and we may be trading, we may be fixing up our kitchens, fixing up our living room, creating a remote office. We're doing many things. And that's why as we broaden the economy, other components of the society will be better. And we're going to see an elevated GDP as we do that. But let's be clear, parts of the economy have done really well during this remote living experience.
How much do our economies need to change to really tackle climate change? And are we actually doing enough?
That's a hard question with a hard answer. Let's start out with a basis that we're going to be living with hydrocarbons for many, many years. We still don't have the technology. So we need to be investing in technology to reduce the need for hydrocarbons, building more efficient battery storage. We're going to need to build more efficient large engines, so we don't, for trucks and other large vehicles in terms of electricity. We're going to need to make sure that we have reliable, consistent source of energy for our electricity grids. So all of that means we're going to have long-term planning, which is kind of absent with so many governments today. But what I can tell you from the private sector side, This is a tectonic shift in investor preferences. I have never seen more investors seeking how to transform their portfolios. And through better disclosure by more companies, which I asked in my 2020 letter, that every company reports under SASB and TCFD. As more and more companies do that, we are going to have that data. Through that data, we're going to have the analytics to judge and review every company. Through that process, Francine, we are going to be able to personalize, customize portfolios away from standard indexes.
Yep.
We are going to be able to design portfolios that have far better ESG components. We're going to be able to provide anything for any company or any individual. If you want to have something that is much more sustainable or much more, we are going to be able to design those portfolios by having data of every company and how they're moving forward. Are they moving towards a zero carbon footprint? How are they moving forward? Through TCFD reporting, we're going to learn all that. And as more companies report that, we're going to be able to make those assessments and then design portfolios around it. When that happens, Francine, you're going to see a huge exodus out of traditional indexes into more customization indexes. And that is the tsunami, the tectonic shift that I talked about in my 2020 letter.
What are you expecting from the Biden administration? And what does it mean for Americans? And what does it mean for Europe?
I have a great deal of optimism that the Biden administration is going to be focusing on sustainability in their first 90 days. I do believe that the president is going to be focusing on trying to bring back multilateralism, bringing back conversations, trying to bring down the tone and the tension, still remaining tough in conversations with different countries. But I do believe we're going to try to, the most success the Biden administration can have is the rollout of the vaccination. The faster the United States can have herd immunity, the faster we can broaden the economy. It is not about really tax policy in the first 9 months. It's not about other things. It is about refocusing on America, having America stand for the principles of democracy again and the principles of multilateralism. At the same time, to be as aggressive and forthright in terms of the rollout of the vaccination, herd immunity, and then the economy will accelerate just by the nature that we feel safe and secure again.
So that was Larry Fink. I'm delighted. It was a pretty interesting conversation when you look at everything that we covered. We covered everything from, of course, what business will look like and whether he's expecting his staff to get back to work. So continuing with this theme of how you redesign the economy post-COVID-19, I am delighted to be joined now by Sir Mark Jonathan Caulfield. He is the Chief Scientist, Genomics in England, and Diane Wang, Founder and Chief Executive of DHgate. Now, we have a number of topics, and thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. We have a number of topics to try and talk about, but maybe, Sir Caulfield, let me just, try and understand when we can say that the pandemic is over. So we're seeing a resurgence in cases in many parts in Europe with an acceleration of vaccines. How many percentage of the population need to be vaccinated for us to put these lockdowns, for us to put the pandemic behind us?
So, Francine, that's a really good question. And today, I don't have the precise answer about how many need to be vaccinated because I think we don't know. This is a new disease. We are not absolutely certain how effective all the vaccines are yet in the long term. There is potential for the virus to modify and evolve its genetic makeup. We already see that with 3 strains, one here in the UK, one in South Africa and Brazil, that may make it more transmissible. So the recent resurgence is due to increased transmissibility in many parts of the world of the virus. And this is the natural evolution of the virus. So what we've got to do is to deploy the vaccines, which are a fantastic innovation, as fast as we can and take stock continually and survey for what is colloquially known as vaccine escape. So some people who become infected after they're exposed to the vaccine. and also to continue to read the genetic makeup of the virus to work out ahead of time, do we need to re-engineer the vaccines to make sure we get the world safe as fast as possible?
Diane, you sit in a part of the world which has largely dealt with the vaccine, it dealt actually with the pandemic. It was dealt with more forcefully than a lot of our European countries, and you come out at the moment much stronger. What did you learn about how, in Asia's case, a short-lived pandemic, for now at least, actually has transformed business?
Okay, thank you, Francine. Good evening from China. Thank you for having me here. As we know, the pandemic has devastated every sector of business, particularly on the international trade. So look at China, for example, the whole supply chain, including manufacturers, sales channels, and logistics, was severely affected in Q1 last year. But thanks to digital solution, e-commerce has disrupted the traditional trade. We can see from the government's data that sales volume of cross-border e-commerce jumped over 30% last year. We also benefit from digitalization. In our e-commerce platform, sellers and partners could sustain their growth with digital tools. For example, we used AI and big data to quickly adjust their product portfolio and leverage SaaS to build up smart supply chain system and support them with microloan financing. Thus, we have been redefined traditional international trade and helped all parties achieve win-win situation, including suppliers, retailers, and service providers worldwide.
But Diane, can you give us an idea of, did things go back to the way they were? I know there's a very big push in commerce. You were laying there some of the things. Of course, that was put in place also by authorities. But in general, have the patterns of people, not only shopping online, going to restaurants and things like that, have they gotten back to normal once people felt safe?
Well, actually, I think after this pandemic, there is nothing we can go back. I think the pandemic is rapidly changing, everything, going toward online channels. And I think the shifts are likely to stay post-pandemic. It's become a routine, as I mentioned earlier, nowhere to go back, and forcing companies to escalate digital transformation. This year, as a B20 co-chair of the digitalization task force, we have identified 3 potential key focus areas for business communities. First, we wanted to create a correct foundation ground for digital transformation to unleash their potential. And second, we wanted to enhance offering by facilitating development of products and service. And third, stimulate the demand for digital product and services from companies and customers. I think we are all clear from the business sectors. Only by working together between the public and private sectors to promote the digital transformation, then we can restore the world economy.
Thank you, Diana. And we want to hear a little bit more, of course, about this digital transformation and what it means for China longer term. If you look, Sir Caulfield, at some of the concerns that we have, and you mentioned the variants, again, it's a difficult question because there's so many questions and we don't have that many answers. But when do you think life will get more back to normal in the UK, or at least in our Western societies? No longer social distancing, no longer mask wearing, people traveling more.
So I agree with Diane. I think we will change our lives somewhat forever. I completely agree with what she said about that. We'll think about things differently. This is effectively the 6th pandemic we've had in the last 40 years. And this one has been devastating. 97 million people affected worldwide, and that's an estimate, and 2 million have perished. And between 5 and 10% of them will continue to live with this, with long COVID, which is where you don't completely recover. So vaccinating is really, really important. I think we can see some hope of returning to something that resembles our former lives. But I don't know that we should all go back to the way we live. Larry said earlier that, you know, he doesn't relish getting on an aircraft and traveling around the world. Maybe we need to do less of that. Maybe we've worked out how we can work differently. I think we as a human race now, we've had our real wake-up call. This is our moment to change the way we are. It's also our moment to take infectious disease really seriously. Not only do we have serious viruses, but we also have antimicrobial resistance. So our antibiotics don't work anymore properly. So when can we return to any form of going outside? Well, I would have thought in the UK, with mass vaccination, we may be able to release our lockdown in a few months, but I don't think we will release it before April time. But even if we do that, we will need to be surveying continually the virus to make sure it has not evolved to escape the vaccine. And also, we need to sustain the business, public, charitable partnerships that have accelerated treatments so that we can now do trials in record time, get medicines into people, and we've developed multiple vaccines. And this is a social responsibility for the whole of humanity. At the end of this, we've got to make sure we bring everyone with us, because if we leave a reservoir of this virus somewhere in the world, it will come back. It's endemic now. It will come back in a different form. And we need a future global health surveillance system for viral genomics and human genomics so we can spot these things much more quickly, develop vaccines more quickly, and avoid the devastation that we've seen. And that's the way the future economy will be protected, in my view.
So, Mark, where will the next pandemic come from? Is it something to do with this one, or with what you've just laid out, in very simple terms? If we do that so that we monitor, can we avoid the next big pandemic, or at least avoid it becoming a pandemic?
So, Francine, it's entirely possible to survey both within the animal species that harbour this virus where there's no harm, for example, in this case, a bat, and other similar species. But what we need is a globally coordinated health emergency approach to this with public health surveillance that's continuous, integrated, global worldwide sharing. The Wuhan doctors shared their virus very quickly. That hugely helped accelerate the vaccine. If that had not happened, we would not have vaccines today. So we're no longer in a nation, we're in a planet. Of course, we are in nations, but how we work together as a human race will characterize whether we can defeat this. What I can say in respect to where it will come from is that we've had HIV, SARS-1, MERS, H1N1, Zika, and now SARS-CoV-2. So I can predict where it can come from as well as you can, Francine, and I don't know, but we've got to get rid of this one, and then we've got to focus on how we detect the other one, the new ones, before they get out. It's very evident from the UK that transmission by multiple introductions from multiple countries was the problem. This is true worldwide. Actually, interestingly, not from the Far East. It had come from the Far East into Europe and from Europe into the UK. And then we unlocked, went on holidays, we brought it back again. So the current wave is a new virus that's actually emergent. And that will have that we think will be okay with the vaccine. But we have to keep vigilant. And that's the way we'll have some form of normality. But I'm with Diane on this one. I don't think we'll go back to the way we were.
I do have quite a lot of questions on vaccine, Mark, so we'll get back to that. Diane, talk to us a little bit about, so you mentioned, digitization, the pillar of really the future, and also for the Chinese economy. How will it transform global trade? How will it transform some of the things that, we talk about day in, day out in economics?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, Francine, China is likely the major economy in the world that achieved the positive economic growth and witnessed and expanded trade last year. The GDP reached a 2.3% growth with the fast recovery from the crisis. When we examine the reason behind, we found digital transformation play a very important role in restoring the economy. For example, a digitalized international trade. According to China Customs Report, just announced recently, sales volume through cross-border e-commerce actually recorded a robust growth at 31%, compared with general foreign trade at 1.9% only. So we also found some other key factors for the strong performance, including the resilient supply chain, comprehensive policy support for e-commerce and logistics, and also the new technologies like AI and big data. They're boosting the economy through digitalizations. So this is the lesson we learned from this crisis, Francine.
Diane, what's the biggest challenge for workers and for economies? Because that will, give them the tools to adapt if they know at least what their challenge is.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. The pandemic has gravely damaged the world economy, including all the communities and individuals. But the benefits and the necessity of digitalizations are also very obvious in restoring the economy. And more importantly, it brings opportunities for MISME, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and women-owned business to benefit from the economy equally. But the biggest challenges we'll see is that many countries, companies, and individuals are not ready. They have problems in accessing skills, technologies, and finance. We also find uneven progress along with the digital transformation in many countries, resulting in a larger and a larger digital gap. So Francine, we must change this, get the public and the private sectors to work together to help all stakeholders work through the storm. So that's where we wanted to go in this year, B20. We wanted to advocate in this direction, Francine.
Thank you, Diane. Mark, I think I only have time for one last question, which is, what is your roadmap? And this is a difficult question, but what is the roadmap to try and understand whether the vaccines actually work? Where do you see it first? Is it less people hospitalized? Is it less infections or less deaths?
Well, as we get the vaccine deployed, then the number of cases that are being hospitalized will drop down, and that will then ramify onto the number of those who sadly perish as a result of this. So the honest answer is it will take some time, but what we have to do is to keep surveying. And what we're doing in the UK is building electronic surveillance of those who've been vaccinated to watch for reinfection, and then hopefully moving to try and identify through the virus what features have made that person evade the vaccine and make them susceptible to disease. And if we're going to benefit from the transformation, the huge advances and innovations by business partnering with public and charitable sectors over the last year, an amazing transformation, we've got to embrace digital healthcare. The public and patients will come with us because they see the relevance of that, providing we keep them involved and informed. They will trust us to do this, but we have to win that trust and keep it and hold it. And finally, we have to use this to transform our entire lifestyles. And that means having global surveillance that's integrated. It means spotting and developing vaccines early. It means doing trials much faster and quicker, and making all of the changes that we've done in the last 10, 12 months, business as usual, not just for business, but for the whole of humanity.
Thank you both for a very spirited conversation, Mark Caulfield there and Diane Wang. So with that, I'm going to send it back to Giuseppe. Giuseppe.
Thank you, Francine. Thank you to your guests and to our guests, B20 guests. And let's go to another session. It's a very pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Michael Bloomberg, Bloomberg LP founder and Bloomberg Philanthropies founder.
Thank you, and hello everyone. It's great to be with you all today. This has been a very difficult time for everyone around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has killed more than 2 million people, and it has upended the global economy, throwing millions more out of work. But while life as we knew it came to a halt this past year, the effects of climate change continued to devastate communities around the world, causing trillions of dollars in damage. So climate change is an economic crisis too, and no vaccine will end it. So as we rebuild and recover from the pandemic, we need the private and public sectors to work together to confront climate change with the urgency that is required. The market has a critical role to play in that work. Since 2015, I've helped lead a global effort to create standards for businesses to disclose critical information about the impact of climate change. It's called the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD for short. Risk disclosure may not be the flashiest way to speed progress on climate change, but it is one of the most important. And it's also a win-win for all parties involved. Business leaders want to reduce the risks they face, and this framework helps them identify and understand those risks. The better they can measure risks and opportunities, the more effectively they can act. And investors, lenders, and insurers need to understand the impact of climate change on companies in order to make informed capital allocation decisions. So far, more than 1,700 organizations in the public and private sector, representing over $17.3 trillion in market capitalization, have endorsed TCFD disclosure framework. More than 100 regulators and a growing number of national governments have also announced support for climate-related disclosures. But we still have a long ways to go, and our efforts have become even more important since the pandemic. To ensure that the global economy not only recovers, but comes back stronger and remains more resilient for generations to come, it is essential that leaders at every level of government integrate sustainability into their economic recovery plans. Here in the United States, despite all that has happened over the past few weeks, there are still many reasons to be optimistic about our immediate future. The Biden administration has just taken office and will now begin to repair our relationships with countries around the world. And I know that reestablishing the U.S. as a global leader in the fight against climate change is a top priority for President Biden and his administration. Rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement is an important step, but that must only be the start. Winning the climate fight will require an all-hands-on-deck approach, and we need businesses and governments to be rowing in the same direction. So I encourage everyone in the private sector to join us, and it's my hope that President Biden will unify this global effort by endorsing a mandatory standard for businesses to report the risks they face from climate change. We don't have a day to waste. To build a stronger, more resilient future for our children and grandchildren, we need to build a stronger, more resilient economy that can withstand the effects of climate change, which are only getting worse. And this would be a significant step in doing just that. Thank you, take care, and stay safe.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomberg. Thank you so much. We heard also about you many interesting topics on climate change. So right now we are ready to open another topic. Please look. Changing lives. So it's a pleasure to introduce to you our next guest. As you can see, is the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, the executive director of the World Food Programme, David Beasley. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with everybody around the world as you're joining us from wherever you are. I'm here in Rome, Italy. So this B20 opportunity is, in my opinion, probably one of the most important time frames that we've had in a very long time. And let me sort of give you some good news, and then I'll give you some very bad news. And the good news is when you look at food security and poverty around the world, it's hard to believe that 200 years ago, a population of about 1.1 billion people on Earth, over 95% of the people on Earth were in extreme poverty. Just imagine what that looked like. 200 years later, in a population of 7.7 billion people, give or take, less than 10% of the people on Earth are in extreme poverty. So in the last 200 years, empowering the private sector, engaging as we have shared more wealth, more opportunity than any time period in world history. That's the good news. We've made great progress. The bad news is we still have 10% of the people we're not reaching. Now, if you're in that 90%, great. But if you're in that 10%, they're wondering, where's the prosperity for me? And if we don't reach that 10%, you end up with mass migration or destabilization or famine or poverty, starvation, etc. And what's really heartbreaking is there's about $400 trillion worth of wealth on earth today. And not a single child should go to bed hungry, much less starve to death. Now, here's the really bad news. When I joined and took the leadership at the World Food Program 4 years ago, there were 80 million people on earth that were marching to the brink of starvation. Now, that's people that don't know where their next meal's coming from. There's about 700 million people that go to bed hungry or struggle with hunger around the world. But we're talking about the worst of the worst. They don't know where the next meal is, and they're literally marching towards starvation, 80 million people. Now, 3 years later, meaning at the end of 2019, right before COVID, that number had gone from 80 to 135 million people. And the question is, why? With all the wealth and technology, what are we missing? And the answer, of course, is not to tear down the systems that we built that are reaching the 90%, but how do we reach that last 10%? And then the question today is that why is the severe hunger rate spiking? And the number one answer is man-made conflict, whether you talk about Yemen or Syria, and I could go along 18, 19 other places on earth where there's conflict. The second reason is climate extremes, whether you talk about hurricanes or droughts or flooding or whatever the case may be. And I can tell you firsthand, an organization like us, we assist about 100 million people throughout the year. And when you feed or assist 100 million people, you know what's going on in the neighborhood. If I fed everybody in your neighborhood for 2 years, do you think I'd know what's going on in your community? And the answer is yes. We survey and talk to a lot of our beneficiaries to find out what's going on in their lives and what are they thinking, what do they need. And I can assure you, I haven't met a beneficiary yet that really wanted outside help. They want to be free and independent, take care of their own families. They want sustainability and resilience. When I joined the World Food Program 4 years ago, my goal was to put the World Food Program out of business, that we would no longer be needed. Unfortunately, we haven't been successful because of man-made conflict and climate extremes. And in fact, the Nobel Peace Prize Committee awarded us the Nobel Peace Prize, which I was so fortunate to receive that award just a month ago. And I think it was two reasons they did that. One was, thank you, World Food Program, for your women and men to lay their lives on the line every single day to help bring peace and stability in the most difficult places on earth. Because a lot of teams and regimes and extremist groups, they use food as a weapon of division, a weapon of a war, or even a weapon of recruitment, where you may have ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab. But we use it as a weapon of peace. So first, it was a thank you to our women and men who are working so hard out there to bring peace and stability in very difficult places. I think the second was your most difficult work is ahead of you. Because when COVID hit in 2020, I think everybody was devastated and what the impact was going to be, and hopeful that it would be a short-term impact. I remember it was about March of 2020 when actually I had gotten COVID, and thank God I got through it. But Tony Blair called me on the phone one day. He said, David, what are you seeing around the world? You travel to more countries than probably any leader on earth. And I said, Tony, what I'm very concerned about is that we're making decisions about COVID in a vacuum. And if we're not careful, we will destroy the supply chain, and the economic ripple effect can make it that the cure is worse than the disease. So we must make certain that we balance a hunger pandemic with a health pandemic and strategically align them together so we minimize the impact of both. And so right before COVID, as I mentioned to you, the number of people marching to starvation went from 80 to 135 million. Since COVID, that number is now spiking to 270 million people around the earth. And if we don't get on top of both of these, I can assure you it will have catastrophic results. We will need just 5 billion. We are, like, for example, in 2020, about an $8.4 billion operation, but we will need just to avert famine, $5 billion alone. That's to assist 30 million people that will be in famine-like conditions if we're not there to meet their needs. And I can assure you, if we're not there, you will have famine, mass starvation. 2, you will have destabilization. And 3, you'll have mass migration. It's going to be a lot cheaper to get ahead of it than it is to be after the fact. I could talk to you about hours on hours, and I was hoping that today would be a chance that we can talk about the long-term solutions. It's not charity, though charity is very important. The long-term solution is the private sector being strategically engaged. I believe that we can end hunger, but we have to end war and conflict. We have to address issues like climate change. But while we need your money this year, 2021, because of this catastrophic dynamic that we're facing, and let me just say this, the 2,200 billionaires on Earth in 2020 made on average $5.2 billion in increased net worth per day. All I'm asking for to avert famine alone is 1 day's worth of your net worth. Please help us step up. And then after that, I want you to engage with us, not as much more your money is your strategic guidance and planning on the ground and working in countries where I know we can end hunger if we have your engagement and your involvement, because you're critical. The United Nations, in my opinion, historically has shunned the private sector, but there's a renewed spirit in the United Nations to bring the private sector, small, large, and big businesses, to involve your strategic leadership in helping us address issues on the ground. We can end hunger, we can end poverty. We've got the experience, we have the wealth, we just need the commitment. So thank you. We look forward to working with you this year.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Thank you for what you do day by day with your program and your organization. Thank you so much. Now we are ready for another panel session. Look with me what we are talking about. This session will be not moderated by me, so I'd like to involve Jackie Davis. Jackie, can you hear me?
I certainly can. Thank you very much indeed, Giuseppe. And welcome to this panel on making economic global governance more effective. A debate which, as our opening speakers this afternoon made clear, could not be more timely. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, critics were warning that the so-called Bretton Woods institutions, which laid the foundation for the post-war economic order 76 years ago, and whose goals and spirits still inspire global policymakers, were, as Emma Marcegaglia said in the opening session, designed in a world that was radically different and far less complex than the one we're in today. She also, therefore, questioned, are we at risk of them being doomed into irrelevance if they can't reform and reinvent themselves to meet the challenges of the 21st century? As Roberto Gualtieri said, quote, renewed multilateralism is a precondition for progress. And Carlo Bonomi underlined the need for major change, describing this as a watershed moment after a crisis which he said has revealed that, quote, global governance is dangerously fragmented and intrinsically fragile. And finally, both Carlo and Emma said, the time is now. So what neat changes are needed to make global economic governance fit for purpose in the face of these challenges? And just how radical do those changes need to be? My name is Jackie Davis. I will be moderating this entirely interactive discussion. We're going to have a short keynote to introduce it by David Walker, who is chair of the World Trade Organization General Council, and then I'll introduce the rest of our panelists and we'll get underway. But David, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jackie. Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks also to the B20 chair, Emma Marcegaglia, for the invitation to this panel session. 2020 was a very challenging year on many fronts. The COVID-19 pandemic triggered an unprecedented health and economic crisis, It has threatened and continues to threaten the lives and livelihoods of millions of people around the world. It also put added strain on international relationships. In some instances, these disruptions, as you noted, have further exposed the shortcomings and vulnerabilities that the global governance architecture was already struggling with. But if there is one thing that the pandemic has reinforced, it is the lesson that global challenges, be they of a financial, health, or other nature, require global solutions. Among the many recognitions of this, G20 leaders last year remained firm in their conviction that, and I quote, coordinated global action, solidarity, and multilateral cooperation are more necessary today than ever, close quote, and pledged to lead the world in shaping a strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive post-COVID-19 era. COVID-19 remains first and foremost a human tragedy, and saving lives is the natural priority. But the economic dimensions of the crisis threaten to compound its negative effects, and saving livelihoods is also of paramount importance. Both these priorities have international as well as domestic dimensions, and given the borderless nature of this virus, global action needs to accompany domestic efforts. Here, the WTO, as part of the architecture of global economic governance, has an important role to play. The remit of the WTO, clue in the name, is trade, and its niche in the architecture, the rules-based multilateral trading system. That system, resting on the contract between members, has three components: implementation, in both its monitoring and enforcement elements, rulemaking, and what's often termed the deliberative function. All three of those components have played a part in what the WTO has been able to contribute over the past year, and each will be critical in the path ahead. For example, the Secretariat has put in place an important monitoring exercise, offering WTO members and the public timely and accurate information about trade-related measures taken in the context of the pandemic, as well as in-depth analysis on the impact of the virus on trade and WTO activities. Recent example of this is the report Developing and Delivering COVID-19 Vaccines Around the World, which was published on the 22nd of December and is available on the WTO website. WTO joined forces with other international organizations, including the World Health Organization, World Customs Organization, and UN Food and Agricultural Organization, in efforts to ensure the flow of essential goods such as vital medical supplies, food, and energy. The WTO also paired with multilateral and regional development banks to voice support for trade finance amid the COVID-19 crisis. WTO members have also been active. There have been numerous calls for open markets, free flow of trade and essential goods, minimal supply chain disruptions, and for emergency trade measures to tackle COVID-19 to be targeted, proportionate, transparent, temporary, and consistent with WTO rules. And members individually and in various groupings have taken concrete action with trade facilitating measures both on the import and export side. Why is this important? Trade is not an end in itself, nor do I venture would anyone who has had anything to do professionally with either the establishment or the operation of the WTO suggest it should be looked at as the answer to all problems. But as this pandemic has again reminded us, trade is a vital part of dealing with global challenges and in building the path forward to help deliver sustainable economic growth, development, and prosperity for all members. The three pillars of Italy's G20 presidency are people, planet, and prosperity. You will find these same three pillars embraced in the objectives of the Marrakesh Agreement, which established the WTO 25 years ago. In joining, each and every member of the WTO has signed up to those objectives to enhance employment, incomes, prosperity, and sustainable development. And as reflected in Italy's G20 presidency, they remain as relevant today as when they were originally codified. It is the continued furtherance and achievement of those objectives going forward that requires change to be agreed and delivered by the membership to address the new realities of today's trading environment. 2021 is an important year to make a start on this, to rebuild trust in global cooperation, including through the WTO. To do this, it will be important to enhance coordination and coherence within governments in their international engagement, between international organizations, and an engagement with stakeholders across both. Fortunately, we are not starting from scratch. At the international level, we can build on the existing broad network of institutions and international organizations and the expertise and support they offer to ensure our institutions are fit for purpose and working effectively. As part of that, the WTO can usefully further enhance cooperation and coordination with relevant international organizations and stakeholders. Members have a busy agenda. As you all know, we have to complete the process of appointing the new Director General. As we speak, work is underway on the fisheries subsidies negotiations where, albeit for understandable reasons in the 2020 context, we are now overdue on the leaders' timeframe in the Sustainable Development Goal 14.6. And we have a ministerial conference to prepare for and successfully conduct at some point during this year. Reflecting developments that have taken place in the global economy and the pandemic, people, planet, and prosperity are very much part of this agenda. Leaving aside the many ideas that have been variously advanced in what might be termed the WTO reform space, let me highlight a few examples.
Briefly now, if you would, David, we're running out of time.
Okay. In addition to what I referred to earlier, a number of potential initiatives in the area of trade and health are under consideration or active discussion by members. And just today, a number of members announced a specific initiative in support of the World Food Programme. Sustainability issues come to the fore, and beyond negotiations of fish subsidies, there are a number of specific initiatives across that agenda being discussed. The growth of electronic commerce and digital trade is another major trend in the global economy. How the innovations of electronic commerce and digitization can best be supported and harnessed to contribute to inclusive development is a focus of activity this year. So too, are discussions on fostering women's economic empowerment through trade and supporting micro, small and medium-sized enterprises to better integrate in international trade. Okay. As we look, and this is my concluding point, as we look across the international agenda, not only in addressing the current crisis, but in making our global economic structure resilient to future challenges, the private sector has a lot to contribute with its dynamism, resourcefulness and innovative thinking, and your contribution will be invaluable as G20 leaders discuss this road to sustainable recovery and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And you pointed out there, global challenges require global solutions. Goes back to that title of our event today, where one of the key words, reshaping the future, include share and act. So we're going to talk a bit more about that. We heard what the WTO has been doing in responding to COVID and the challenges ahead as you outlined them. But crucially, do the rest of our panel think our governance mechanisms are fit for purpose? If not, what do we need to do? Joining me to discuss this are Martha Hall-Findlay, Chief Sustainability Officer for the integrated energy company Suncor, Michael Punk, who is Vice President for Global Public Policy at Amazon Web Services, and Nicolas Pinot, Sherpa to the G20 and G7 for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Let's jump straight in. Can I come back to the point that Carlo Bonomi made at the beginning of this event when he talked about the mechanisms being dangerously fragmented and intrinsically fragile? David said there, yes, COVID exposed some of those fragilities, but we were already struggling with them. Martha, from your perspective, would you agree with that analysis? And what do you see as the key challenges if we are to fix those fragilities, that fragmentation?
Well, thanks so much, Jackie, for and the organizers for the invitation, and buongiorno a tutti. I would actually say that COVID has not just highlighted it because of COVID. I would say that we have been watching these challenges over the last number of years, and not just because of what was happening in American politics in the last 4 years, but we have seen an increase in political polarization and partisanship, and an increase in totalitarian approaches to governance around the world, which has meant a significant lack of desire for collaboration. Clearly, we're going to talk a little bit about a watershed. I think we're looking at a watershed, but I think the watershed that has happened in this regard has been happening over in the last number of years. I think what COVID has done has just reinforced the challenges, has accelerated some of those problems. And I hope we get a chance to talk about what are some of the really positive lessons that we may have learned from COVID.
Absolutely. Michael Punk, coming to you, in terms of this watershed moment, do you agree with that assessment? And also, for you, why is it so important to address this now? We are facing multiple challenges in the wake of the COVID pandemic. Why is this issue of global economic governance so important right now?
Well, let me just say, first of all, that as an American, this is obviously a moment of incredible challenge, but I think it's also a moment of hope and optimism. And I'm somebody who has a tendency to try and see the glass half full, and I want to build on that optimism that we're seeing in my country right now, and use that as fuel to address some of the challenges that we face. As somebody who works in a technology company, we've seen over the course of the pandemic a lot of ways in which technology has helped us to address the crisis. As somebody who used to work as an ambassador to a multilateral organization, I certainly believe this is a watershed moment. We should take advantage of the crisis to ask really hard questions. And as my friend David Walker pointed out, a lot of these challenges we've been dealing with for many years, not just the last 4 years.
Thank you very much. Nicola, complete the picture for us from an OECD perspective, and the scale of the challenge as you see it now, and what we're going to do, because I was very struck at the beginning. Emma Marcegaglia said she wanted to make sure that the Italy's G20 presidency had real and lasting impact. So acting now, acting fast, why is it so urgent?
No, absolutely. As David Walker underlined, this is indeed a watershed moment. And I was actually in the first meeting of the Sherpas, of the G20 Sherpas, that is running in parallel of your panel. And several Sherpas underlined the fact that 2021 can be the year of multilateralism. And it's indeed badly needed. This crisis has been destructive. We have undergone a major contraction of global GDP. This crisis has also been disruptive. It has brought to the fore some trends, like digitalization, for instance, that were already in the making. And also this crisis is revealing. If you think, for instance, of the nexus between health and climate and pandemics, which require a sort of integrated policy response to that. And all these challenges require a multilateral response. So we are at the crossroad. Either the crisis will lead to further inward-looking policies from countries, or maybe it will be a new impetus to multilateralism. It seems that with the new geopolitical environment and a new administration in the US, that maybe the second option will be the one that would prevail this year and in the years to come.
Okay, so you feel relatively optimistic. How important do you think it is that the G20 this year does renew and underline that commitment to multilateralism? How important will that be as a political signal? And then we can talk about some of the detailed things that need to be done. But as a Sherpa to the G20, Nicola, how important is that political signal, do you think?
Well, the G20, when it was created, was dubbed the premier forum for international economic cooperation. So it needs to deliver on this mandate. It needs to show that it can really provide concrete answers and concrete policy responses to all the challenges that many of the speakers today have highlighted. And actually, I would like to nuance also the sort of perception that maybe the G20 response last year was quite underwhelming. In fact, if we take a look back, the G20 has provided a very powerful response. If you think, for instance, of the synchronized macroeconomic stimulus that was delivered in the face of the crisis, it's $11 trillion from G20 members, synchronized. It's also a very powerful monetary response. Central banks of G20, in particular of G7, put in place swap agreements to respond to the shortage in the dollar funding. So it was essential. And actually what the G20 members did is to put a floor below the world economy. And that was critical during the crisis.
Yeah, so we tend to focus on the shortcomings, on the problems, but as Martha also indicated earlier, let's not forget some remarkable achievements have been made in terms of keeping people together. But Michael Punk, coming to you on this question of where do we go from here? Is it a question, do you think, of institutional fixes? Is it just about changing the way these multilateral organizations work? Or do we need a new vision? Do we need a new idea that really drives that cooperation, that coordination between governments, between international organizations, with stakeholders? Is it a new vision, or is it a very practical fix if we're going to deliver on those three pillars of the Italian G20 presidency: the people, the planet, the prosperity, and the sustainable development goals? Is it fixes or vision? Same question to you all. Michael, you're muted, I think. Michael?
Having a very practical streak when it comes to thinking about multilateralism. For me, as somebody who sat in a multilateral institution and tried to get things done for 7 years, I think too often we think of multilateralism as a theology, as opposed to a tool. I think multilateralism is a tool. And there are some problems which are best addressed by the tool of multilateralism. We've heard a lot of discussion of issues like global health, global pollution as issues that require inherently a global solution. There are other problems that don't get fixed by multilateralism and indeed can be deadlocked by multilateral discussion. And so I think we should be clear-eyed and practical in how we deploy different tools, whether it's the WTO or the G20.
Thank you. For you, Martha, is it fixes, or does it need to be under the umbrella of a new vision, a new way of working, and then you deal with the problems, the detailed problems related to WTO reform, related to the World Health Organization, and the IMF and World Bank? Which comes first? Do we need to fix some of the clear and obvious mechanical problems, or is it the vision thing?
Well, vision is wonderful. We saw that kind of vision after the Second World War, but you don't get anywhere with vision if you don't actually have the action and the leadership to support it and to reach it. So, of course, we need vision. I would argue that some of the vision is not that different than what we've had before. I would argue that our implementation of some of those visions has suffered in the last number of years. And I love Michael's optimism, the glass half full. What I think is very interesting, and I did say at the beginning, I think where we can go is learning from some of the lessons of COVID. I think one of the biggest single lessons has been the importance of collaboration. And I would stress not just collaboration among governments, because frankly, I'm seeing that more and more difficult these days. Even in my own country of Canada, we have 13 jurisdictions in addition to a federal government. We've had 13 different sets of rules, 13 different sets of protocols. It has been challenging, but what I have seen is the private sector stepping up in a really big way. We have major corporations had set up a coalition of collaboration on testing, testing COVID test kits, as well as protocols. Some of them saying, here, you go test this one and see what happens. You go test this one on your factory floor. That kind of private sector collaboration, which is, of course, what the B20 is all about, is, I think, a major part of implementing the vision that I think we have.
But Martha, just on that vision question, if I can come back on it, Sustainability wasn't a word when the Bretton Woods institutions were invented. It wasn't a word that existed. It wasn't I mean, do you think, and there's been criticism of multilateral organizations, that they've been slow on issues like climate change, slow also on digital issues. You need to be very fast, you need to be agile. And I think that's what I meant when I said, do we need, therefore, a new vision? And Nicola, I'd like to come back to you on the same thought, and Michael. But how do we make sure sustainability really is at the core? So we don't just revive multilateralism, but for the right purpose. It's not an end in itself.
I agree with that, but I would go back to, I don't think the vision is that much different. When you talk about people, planet, and prosperity, those were all issues even, post-war. Maybe it was peace as distinct from climate change. But the key here is, how do we address what we see globally as significant challenges, and how do we manage to get that collaborative effort back on track among governments? And I would say, how do we harness the power of the private sector to collaborate, not just for their own profit and self-interest, but I really sense a larger desire, and you heard Michael Bloomberg talk earlier, a larger desire to be engaged in helping find some of those global solutions. I think there's a lot to be harnessed there.
Thank you. Nicola, same question to you in terms of the vision and sustainability, but also in terms of the agility of economic governance in the face of fast-moving developments in a digital world.
No, absolutely. And I like very much what Michael said. We don't need a new theology about multilateralism. And I'm actually a bit suspicious when we talk about vision. I think what we need, especially in the current context, where there is a lot of fragmentation, a lot of geopolitical tensions, I don't think that the current context lends itself to a grandiose vision. What we need is for the multilateral system to be agile, to be action-oriented, outcome-oriented. And let me give you just one example. You were mentioning digitalization, taxation. Let's say the revisit of the international tax architecture that the OECD has supported jointly with the G20 since 2010 on tax evasion, on tax avoidance, and now on tax and digitalization. This is something that has been very pragmatic, gradual. We have created new entities, very light, very flexible, the Global Forum on Tax Transparency, the BEPS Inclusive Framework. This is how I think multilateralism can respond to those challenges in a very pragmatic way.
Thank you very much. And Michael, on that question of the digital era and the fast-moving pace of e-commerce and so on, what advice would you have in terms of tools to introduce the agility needed to respond to those?
I want to just say one thing very quickly about a point Martha made that I really strongly agree with before hitting that question, if I can, Jackie, and that is, I think it's really important that we focus not just on multilateral institutions and governments, but also the role that the private sector has to play. There's very few silver bullets in the world. And if you take an issue like climate change, where obviously there is a need for all of the above, I could not be more excited that as of yesterday, the U.S. government is a member again of the Paris Agreement. But I think it's important to emphasize that while the U.S. federal government quit the Paris Agreement, many Americans as citizens and states and cities and companies did not quit the Paris Agreement. And in fact, my company, Amazon, in 2019 pledged to meet the Paris goal 10 years early. So private sector has a real role in this. As far as tech and agility, I think that agility is critical, and tech obviously moves incredibly fast. And technology is an area that I think governments need to focus on, including issues like maintaining the free flow of data internationally. But that may be best done in smaller, more nimble configurations that can move quickly, and then we build outward from those smaller successes.
Okay, we are almost out of time. I wish I could continue this wonderful discussion for hours, but let me just put you all on the spot before we finish. And Nicola, I'm going to go in reverse order to how we started. So I'm going to come to Nicola first, then to Michael, then to Martha, and finally to David. I want to go back to our event title today, Reshape the Future include, share, and act. Emma Marcegaglia, as I say, she talked about the Italian G20 presidency having real and lasting impact, and she and Carlo said the time is now. So if the time is now for each of you, if you had to identify a top priority or a key next step to really make progress on making sure we have global economic governance that's fit for purpose, in a sentence and a half each, I'm really sorry, but just to identify where you think we go from here. Nicola, you'll be working on this all year. What's the key next step?
Well, I think there are really three domains in which really the G20 needs to make a difference. The first, as I said, and I refer to that, is digital taxation. I think there is a lot of expectation from the public opinion on that, and we need to deliver this global consensus solution by next summer. The second one, obviously, is health and vaccines as a public good. And there we heard the call from Dr. Tedros a few days ago, this vaccine nationalism. We need to ensure that all countries have access to vaccines. And looking ahead, climate, there indeed also the G20 needs to give a strong impetus to the negotiations ahead of the COP26. It's absolutely essential. Also, the COP20, the COP15 on biodiversity is also critical.
Thank you very much indeed. Michael.
So it's there's a lot of work to be done. I certainly agree with comments. It's hard to imagine something more significant than addressing the health crisis right now, given the pandemic that we're all living through. Climate change, I think many people have talked about as an existential issue for the planet. One issue that we haven't talked about today that I think is critical and where there's huge potential for public-private partnership is workforce development.
Yeah.
You know, one of the ways of addressing concerns that stem out of populism is by creating meaningful jobs for people around the planet. And there is huge potential for government and private sector to work together to promote that type of training.
So on those three pillars of the presidency, people, planet, prosperity, don't forget the people in all of this. Martha.
Well, I would say first, as an energy company, a huge challenge facing the world is how do we meet the ever-increasing energy demands in a way that also addresses our climate change challenges. And that doesn't come from stopping, because that affects the prosperity. That comes from collaborating to figure out, okay, how do we do that? And there are a lot of initiatives now that are underway that are exciting. But I would say on this topic, we keep talking about multilateralism as being only among governments. I see a real opportunity, especially now, because, you know, the Edelman Trust Barometer came out. Trust in governments has actually receded, not entirely surprising. Trust in the private sector and in business has in fact gone up. Let's talk about how globally, how can the business sector engage multilaterally in talking about how to address carbon taxes, cross-border carbon taxing. Even to Nicholas's point, the engagement in how do we address world taxation in a way that actually makes more sense than what we have now. I think the private sector has an incredible role to play.
And that is what the B20 is all about, and the work that starts tomorrow. David, you have the last word. And David talked earlier in his opening remarks about improving coordination and cooperation within governments, then between governments, and he said too, engaging with stakeholders. But David, for you, your key next step, key priority to make progress, it can be for the WTO, it can be more broadly for multilateralism in general.
Jackie, I'm not going to pretend to try and sum it all up in one thing. I think everything here that has been said is relevant. And if you have to take a pitch, then rebuilding trust and making it happen is the really important thing to do. And the G20 can provide, the G20 is not everybody, but it can provide important global leadership.
Thank you. I'm very much emphasizing that last word in the title of our event today, ACT. On that note, the audience can't thank you in the virtual world, but let me thank all of you very much for a great conversation. And Giuseppe, back to you.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks to you and to your panelists. Thanks for sharing with us their ideas and their knowledge. So we are coming our last session, so we are ready. So we are close to the end, and B20 Chair Emma Marcegaglia, it's join the podium for closing remarks, please.
Well, first of all, let me really thank all the speakers, the panelists, and all the entrepreneurs, and all the ladies and gentlemen who followed our work. Well, first of all, let me say that a first achievement is that more or less we are on time, which is not, was a little bit difficult, but we are there. No, I think that I'm very happy because I think this event has been a very interesting one, at least from my point of view. I think that all the people who spoke today, coming from institutional, political, or also business leaders, I think everybody has given very clear and important messages, and maybe the most important one that I think I can say is that we have to work all together. This is the time to do it. We have to go to work together, public, private, companies, and this is the time really to go on and to make progress on the most important and key issues. I think I can say that it has been quite some time since I last listened to kind of volitive assertions as those that we heard today. And I have sensed also a kind of true commitment to change, and I hope that this will be brought to action. And as I said in my first speech, we will do all our best really to act, to see real progress and results from our B20 and, of course, the Italian G20. I have registered an incredible number of inputs, and there are a lot of things I think we can do. So I don't want to draw any conclusion, but that just make some remarks on what I consider maybe the most important thing I heard. First of all, let me say that I'm very happy, and I thank Minister Gualtieri because the 6 points that he underlined that are at the core of the work of the Italian G20 are totally in line with our view and of our work. So we will develop these 6 points. Health, you remember, he talked about health, he talked about tax, he talked about climate change, he talks about investment. So all these points will be developed on our task forces. So first of all, let me really thank Minister Gualtieri for this, and also for the involvement that he said he will do with us and all with the engagement group. The second thing I want to underline is that it is very clear, and this is also what we said and also Carlos said at the very beginning, this is really time to make recommendations, to make progress, to achieve a real economic growth with environment protection, with human and labor standards, and with a strong inclusion. This is clear. I think it is possible to do it. All our speakers have talked about that. There is the way to do it, and we will work on that. I was very struck by what Mr. Beasley said about the fact that when you talk about inequality, the first thing is, of course, talking about people where starvation doesn't have food. And he said something that is very clear. He said, well, when we talk about starvation, we are talking about inequality, which is coming mainly from conflicts and climate change. So the second point that I want to underline is that climate change is a key topic. Everybody has said that. I was very happy to hear the strong call from Secretary Kerry. I think we are all there. We all believe that we have to go faster, we have to do more, but it's also very important to say that the fight from climate change has to be based strongly on company investment, on technology, on companies create employment and good jobs on this. So this is very important. We have to go faster, but the core is also on investment and the role of business. And also, I want to underline what Mr. Beasley said about starvation, the food program. It is very important that business is involved, not only because we have to put also our money there, but because we need our strategy, they need our strategic way of thinking and of doing things, mainly for the big multinational working in countries where starvation is still there. So, of course, as we said, very good work with the Italian G20, important point on creating a good balance between economic growth, environmental protection, and labor standard and inclusion, climate change, where we have to do a lot of things. Multilateralism, I think everybody has talked about that. I agree with what has been said in the last panel. Multilateralism is not an ideology. Multilateralism is a tool, so we have to progress on that. What we said at the beginning is that for us, multilateralism means also to say we are against nationalism, we are against protectionism, but I agree on the fact that multilateralism means also to create new tools, to be agile, to really progress on how to really go on what we need. And finally, three more things. The digital is very important. We heard about that. I agree with Diane on the fact that digital is the engine of growth. Digital transformation is very important. But I also agree on the fact that we still have a gap in the skills, on digital skills, and so this has to be also a very important point on which we have to work all together. But I also had that we also need a harmonized standard and the regulatory frameworks also when we talk about digital. So this will be also a very important point. The other point, as I said, is skills, is education. One of the most important things is that everywhere in the world we need to have better education, but also access to education for all the kids, and this is again a very important thing. We will also work on the global financial system. Larry Fink said very interesting thing on the attention to ESG financing, to the fact that we will go through a very personalized way of doing this, but also he underlined that companies understand this very well and are going through that. Last but not least, I kept this at the last point. We want to work very strongly also on health. As you know, tomorrow will be the day of the presentation by our chairs of the different task forces. We have very important task forces, but we decided to introduce a new one that it has never been in the B20 work. This is health, life, and science. We want to have this. This is a new thing. We give a lot of attention to this. So vaccine is very important. Access to health for everybody is very important. Focus on working together, focus on new technology, and focus on research is very important. So I finish saying thank you very much. I think this was a really fruitful conversation. We will work in the best way possible. We will work hand by hand with the Italian presidency. But I want to conclude saying what everybody has said in this panel. The private sectors has a very important role if we want really to progress and to solve problems, because we know the market, we are the one that can make the investment on climate change, we are the one who can help on fighting starvation because we have expertise on this. So the role of private sector is important, and as I said at the beginning, we will take strong and deep responsibility really in trying to solve the problems that we have with us. And finally, I want to say challenges are there. The crisis is not finished, uncertainty is there, but as I said at the beginning, we have a positive vision, and we think that there are a lot of opportunities that if we work together and if we are very committed to work, we can transform into growth, new employment, new jobs, and as it has been said in the final panel, we will restore trust, because trust is the most important thing. Thank you very much and see you tomorrow. Thank you. Oops.
Thank you, Mrs. Marshall. Thank you, Mrs. Marcegaglia. So we arrived at the end of our first day, the first day of B20 Italy Inception meeting. We will be back tomorrow for the closing door meeting. As Mrs. Marcegaglia said before, it's a meeting focused on the work of B20 task forces. And at the end of that day, the B20 will be back in next coming months for other deep events like this one. All of them will be inspired to the claim, the payoff of B20 Italy 2021, reshape the future, include, share, act. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to our panelists, to our guests. Thanks to you that follow us on TV and website, and have a great day. Bye.